Attend, T-I-O-N.
Forward, march! Did you see that?
The freezing mud hit her face
Move
first,
faster, old
then the ice
woman.
water soaked through her thin jacket. Margaret Chen didn't flinch. She'd survived worse than a
sir.
spoiled lieutenant's tantrum. At 52, standing in 28-degree weather while 200 recruits laughed at the old cleaning lady. She knew exactly what she was doing. What Lieutenant Jake Morrison didn't know was that the woman he'd just humiliated, the one shivering in her janitor's uniform, wore 3 stars under that jacket. And she was about to dismantle everything he'd built on his father's name. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before you hear how this ends, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me tell you exactly how a vice admiral brought down the most corrupt family in naval history. Margaret Chen's knees ached as she pushed the industrial mop across the admin building floor at 05:30 hours. The pain was real. 3 surgeries from that Kandahar firefight in 2019 had left their mark. But the identity was fake. Ruth Martinez, according to her worn plastic name badge. Civilian custodial staff. Nobody important. Nobody worth noticing. Exactly as she'd planned it. "Hey, old woman." The voice cracked across the pre-dawn silence like a whip. Margaret didn't turn around immediately. Ruth Martinez wouldn't. Ruth Martinez was 63, according to her falsified personnel file, hard of hearing, grateful to have any job at all. Ruth Martinez would finish her stroke with the mop before acknowledging the voice. Margaret counted to 3, then slowly turned. Lieutenant Jake Morrison stood in the doorway, all 6 feet of entitled fury, wrapped in a dress uniform that probably cost more than Ruth Martinez made in a month. 28 years old, with his father's ice blue eyes and his grandfather's rigid jaw. 3rd-generation military royalty. The kind of officer who'd never scrubbed a floor in his life. "Yes, sir." Margaret let her voice quaver slightly. Years of undercover work had taught her that people hear what they expect to hear. Morrison expected weakness, so that's what she'd give him. "This floor needs to be done by 0600. It's 0534. You're behind schedule." Margaret glanced at the clipboard hanging by the door, the same clipboard she'd reviewed last night. "Sir, the schedule says admin building floors are due by 0630 on Tuesdays." "Did I ask you what the schedule says?" Morrison stepped closer, and Margaret caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with the coffee on his breath. "I'm telling you what I need. This floor. Finished. In 26 minutes. Think you can manage that, or are you too old to understand simple instructions?" Every instinct screamed at Margaret to drop the janitor act and make this entitled brat stand at attention until his legs went numb. But she'd been undercover for 4 days now, and the intelligence she'd gathered was too valuable to blow on personal satisfaction. "Yes, sir, I'll work faster." Morrison's lip curled. "You do that, and when you're done, there's a spill in the 2nd floor bathroom that needs attention. Since you people obviously can't follow a schedule, you can work through your break." He turned on his heel and walked away, his boots leaving muddy prints across the section she'd just finished cleaning. Margaret counted to 10 in Pashto, an old habit from her operator days, then started mopping again. The small digital recorder hidden in her cleaning cart captured everything. 4 days of surveillance had revealed that Morrison's attitude wasn't an isolated incident. It was standard operating procedure. "Don't let him get to you." Margaret turned to find Staff Sergeant David Park standing in the side corridor, a coffee cup in each hand. He was 35, built like the sniper he'd been for 3 tours, with eyes that tracked movement the way combat veterans' eyes always did. "I'm fine," Margaret said, staying in character. "No, you're not. Nobody's fine after Morrison talks to them like that." Park held out one of the coffee cups. "Here. It's cold enough to snow in Southern California. You shouldn't be working without something warm." Margaret hesitated. Ruth Martinez would be grateful but cautious. Would worry about getting in trouble for accepting gifts from active duty personnel. I shouldn't. If Lieutenant Morrison sees, Morrison can go to hell," Park said flatly. "Take the coffee, Ms. Martinez. You've been here since 0400. I've been watching the security logs." That made Margaret's pulse tick up a notch. If Park was monitoring her movements, was her cover compromised? "Why are you watching security logs?" She took the coffee, letting her hand shake slightly from the cold. Park's expression darkened. Because Morrison's been running some kind of operation, and people who ask questions have a habit of disappearing from the assignment roster. I'm trying to figure out who's vulnerable. Old, new, female, non-white, anyone who doesn't fit his profile of valuable personnel. And I fit that profile, Margaret asked carefully. You're a 50-something Hispanic woman working a job that pays $13 an hour. Yeah, Ms. Martinez, you fit the profile perfectly. Park's voice held an edge of anger that seemed directed inward. I've been documenting his violations for 3 months, reported him twice through official channels. Nothing's happened. His father's Admiral Richard Morrison, 3 stars, commands the Atlantic Fleet. Nobody wants to touch the Admiral's son. Margaret filed that information away. Admiral Morrison wasn't on her investigation list, but if he was protecting his son's misconduct, that would change. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Park studied her for a long moment. Because you move wrong. Margaret's training kicked in. Don't react, don't confirm, assess the threat level. I don't understand. Yes, you do. Park's voice dropped lower. You move like someone who's done tactical training. Your eyes track exits. When Morrison got in your face, you shifted your weight to the balls of your feet, combat stance. And that mop handle. You're holding it exactly like a rifle. Support hand, forward dominant hand back, ready to pivot. Damn. Margaret had underestimated him. I clean floors, Sergeant Park. I don't know what you think you saw. I saw someone pretending to be weak who definitely isn't. Park set his coffee cup on the cleaning cart. I don't know who you really are, Ms. Martinez. I don't need to know. But if you're here investigating Morrison, you should know that he's not just an abusive officer. He's running something bigger. Something that involves falsified training records, contractor kickbacks, and a whole network of people who make problems disappear. How do you know this? Because I helped him do it. Park's admission hung in the air between them. 6 months ago, before I understood what I was part of, he told me we were streamlining procurement, cutting red tape to get better equipment faster. I believed him. I was wrong. By the time I figured out what was really happening, I was already complicit. Now I'm trying to document enough evidence to take him down without taking myself down too. Margaret made a decision. Not to blow her cover, but to recruit an asset. If someone were investigating, she said carefully, what would they need to prove? Park's eyes sharpened. Financial records. Morrison's receiving payments through a shell corporation, Patriot Defense Solutions. They supposedly consult on equipment purchases, but it's a front. He's selling training slots to wealthy families for 50 grand each. Getting kickbacks from contractors who want favorable evaluation reports. And he's falsifying records for recruits who fail physical standards as long as their families have the right connections. You have proof. Some. Not enough. The real evidence is in his personal safe in the training facility office. I've seen him access it twice. Whatever he's protecting is in there. Before Margaret could respond, Morrison's voice echoed down the hallway. Park, what the hell are you doing fraternizing with custodial staff? Get your ass to the ready room. Formation in 10 minutes. Park straightened. Yes, sir. He lowered his voice to barely a whisper. Whatever you're doing, do it fast. Morrison's getting paranoid. 3 people have disappeared from the roster in the last month, reassigned to remote posts where they can't talk to anyone. He left without another word. Margaret finished the floor in silence, her mind processing everything Park had revealed. She'd come to San Diego expecting to find security gaps, maybe some minor corruption. What Park was describing was systematic criminal enterprise. At 0600, she headed outside to empty trash cans from the parade ground. The temperature had dropped overnight. Actual snow was falling, a rare event for San Diego that had the base buzzing with confused activity. California wasn't supposed to get snow. The weather anomaly had caught everyone off guard. The parade ground was chaos. Recruits slipped on ice they'd never trained to handle. Drill instructors shouted contradictory orders. And in the center of it all stood Lieutenant Morrison, his face red with fury. This is unacceptable. You people call yourselves military personnel. My grandmother could march better than this, and she's been dead for 15 years. Margaret kept to the edges, collecting trash bags and trying to stay invisible. But Morrison's voice carried across the frozen ground. You old woman, what the hell are you doing on my parade ground? Margaret looked up. Morrison was pointing directly at her. "I'm collecting the trash, sir. It's on my morning checklist." "I don't care what's on your checklist. You don't walk across an active formation. Are you stupid or just senile?" 200 recruits turned to stare. Margaret felt the weight of their attention, saw the mix of embarrassment for her and relief that Morrison's anger had found a different target. "I apologize, sir. I'll go around." "Too late for that. You've already disrupted my formation." Morrison bent down, scooped up a handful of freezing mud mixed with slush, and threw it. The mud hit Margaret in the chest, spattering across her face and jacket. The cold was shocking instantly, soaking through the thin fabric. She heard gasps from the recruits. Even by Morrison's standards, this was extreme. "Now get off my parade ground before I have you written up for insubordination." Margaret wiped mud from her eyes. Ruth Martinez would be humiliated, would hurry away with her head down. But Margaret Chen, Vice Admiral Margaret Chen, had spent 5 years in special operations. She'd been shot at, blown up, and tortured by people far more dangerous than Jake Morrison. She met his eyes for just a fraction of a second, long enough to see him recognize something that made him uncomfortable. Then she lowered her gaze and shuffled away, trash bag clutched in shaking hands. Behind her, Morrison's voice resumed, drilling the recruits. But Margaret heard the slight tremor in it now. He'd seen something in that brief moment of eye contact, something that didn't match the helpless old woman he expected. Good. Let him wonder. Margaret made it to the maintenance shed before her hands stopped shaking, not from cold or fear, but from rage. She pulled out her encrypted phone and typed a message to Master Chief Patricia Sullivan, her second-in-command on this operation. "Escalation confirmed. Morrison's abuse is physical. Need the JAG officer on standby. This might go loud sooner than planned." The response came back in seconds. "Murphy's team is monitoring. Say the word, and we extract you." Margaret looked at her mud-covered reflection in the shed's grimy window. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Never let them make you small, Maggie. Never become cruel like them." She typed back, "Negative on extraction. I'm seeing this through, but activate the support team. We're moving to phase 2. The next 5 hours were a masterclass in systematic humiliation. Morrison seemed to have made her his personal project. He found her in the cafeteria at 0800, interrupting her breakfast, the first food she'd eaten since 0400, to demand she clean up a spill in the officer's mess. The spill was 1 drop of coffee. He stood over her while she mopped it, then deliberately kicked over his water glass and made her clean that too. At 1000, he caught her carrying supplies to the maintenance closet and told her she was walking too slowly, that she was wasting the Navy's time, that maybe she was too old for this job. He said it in front of a group of junior officers who looked away, embarrassed but unwilling to challenge him. At 1200, he found her eating lunch turkey sandwich from home because Ruth Martinez couldn't afford the cafeteria prices, and told her that civilian personnel weren't authorized to use the outdoor benches. Never mind that she'd been eating there for 4 days without issue. She had to move. By 1400, Margaret's cover identity felt more real than she wanted to admit. The ache in her knees, the cold that had seeped into her bones, the accumulating weight of small humiliations. This was what thousands of people experienced every day. People who couldn't fight back. People who needed the job too much to risk complaining. She was documenting everything. The hidden camera in her name badge captured every interaction. The recorder in her cart logged every word. But documentation wasn't enough. She needed Morrison to reveal the full scope of his operation. At 1600, opportunity arrived. Margaret was cleaning the administrative building's 2nd floor when she heard Morrison's voice from the conference room. The door was slightly ajar, unusual since Morrison was paranoid about privacy. She edged closer, mop in hand, the perfect excuse if anyone caught her. Don't care what his qualifications say. His father donated $100 grand to the Navy Relief Fund. That buys him a passing grade. Margaret recognized the second voice, Commander Sarah Vickers, head of recruit training evaluation. Jake, if this recruit can't pass basic physical standards, we can't certify him. It's not about money. It's about safety. His unit could die if... His unit will be fine. He'll wash out in advanced training anyway. We just need to get him through basic, make his father happy, and collect our fee. Patriot Defense Solutions gets 30%, you get 10, I get 60. That's 30,000 in your pocket for changing one score on one test. Are you really going to pretend that's a problem? Silence. Then, the paperwork needs to look legitimate. It will. I've got Thompson in medical records. He'll backdate a waiver for the physical requirement. Shoulder injury, old sports trauma, limited range of motion. Enough to justify modified standards. And if someone audits... Nobody audits Sarah. That's the whole point. My father's position means nobody looks twice at our pipeline. We've been doing this for 3 years. 30 recruits, $1.5 million, 0 problems. Don't develop a conscience now. Margaret's hand tightened on the mop handle. She'd suspected corruption, but hearing Morrison lay it out so casually made her stomach turn. This wasn't just about him. It was systematic, involving multiple officers falsifying medical records, putting lives at risk for profit. She needed to see that Safe Park had mentioned. Needed physical evidence to corroborate what she was hearing. Ms. Martinez. Margaret spun around. Commander Vickers stood in the hallway, her face pale. How long have you been standing there? I'm just cleaning, ma'am. I didn't hear nothing. Vickers studied her clearly, trying to determine if the broken English was real or an act. Morrison wants the conference room cleaned. Do it now. Margaret nodded and headed toward the supply closet for floor cleaner. Behind her, she heard Vickers' urgent whisper. Jake, the cleaning woman, was outside. We need to... The door closed, cutting off the rest. Margaret's encrypted phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked it in the supply closet. Park says Morrison's heading to training facility office. This might be your chance to see the safe. She made a decision. Ruth Martinez would finish her cleaning assignment. Vice Admiral Chen would multitask. Margaret spent 20 minutes ostentatiously cleaning the conference room, while Morrison and Vickers whispered in the corner, clearly debating what to do about her. Finally, Morrison left his face tight with anger. Vickers followed 5 minutes later. Margaret waited another 10 minutes, then headed toward the training facility. The building was mostly empty. Recruits were at evening mess, instructors were filing reports. Margaret's custodial access gave her legitimate reason to be anywhere on base. She pushed her cart through the side entrance and headed for Morrison's office. The door was locked, but Margaret had learned to pick locks during her 3rd deployment in Yemen. 30 seconds and she was inside. The office was exactly what she expected. Ego wall covered in photos of Morrison with various admirals and senators, awards he'd inherited, more than earned, a desk that cost more than most enlisted personnel made in a month. And in the corner, a floor safe behind a decorative panel. Margaret knelt beside it, pulling out her phone to photograph the model number. Military safes were standardized. She could get the override code from Murphy within an hour. But something made her try the obvious first. She entered 0815. August 15th. Admiral Morrison's birthday, according to his official bio. The safe clicked open. Sometimes the entitled ones were also the stupid ones. Inside was exactly what Park had described. Financial records. Bank statements showing deposits from Patriot Defense Solutions. Contracts with defense contractors offering consultation fees for favorable equipment evaluations. And a ledger, an actual handwritten ledger, listing every recruit whose training slot had been purchased, every officer who'd been paid off, every falsified record. Morrison had documented his own crimes. Probably thought his father's position made him untouchable. Thought nobody would ever have the authority to look. Margaret photographed everything, working quickly but methodically. Evidence was useless if chain of custody was broken. Everything by the book. Everything legally admissible. She was on the last page when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Morrison's voice. I don't care if she seems harmless. She was outside that conference room. We can't risk. Margaret had perhaps 3 seconds. She closed the safe, spun the dial, closed the decorative panel, grabbed her mop from the cart, and was on her knees scrubbing the floor when Morrison burst through the door. What the hell are you doing in my office? Margaret looked up, letting confusion cross her face. Sir, I was told to clean all the offices. It's on my evening checklist. Morrison strode forward and ripped the clipboard from her cart, scanning the list. She'd added training facility offices herself that afternoon in handwriting that matched the custodial supervisor's style. One of many small preparations that made deep cover work succeed. Fine, Morrison said, but his eyes were scanning the room, looking for anything out of place. His gaze landed on the decorative panel. Margaret kept mopping, moving slowly like her knees hurt, which they did, and staying in character. Morrison crossed to the safe, checked the panel. It was exactly as he'd left it. He spun back to Margaret. "How long have you been in here?" "Maybe 5 minutes, sir. I do the windows first, then the floor. Standard procedure." "Did you touch anything? Papers, files, anything on my desk?" Margaret let her eyes go wide. "No, sir. I'm not allowed to touch nothing except cleaning supplies and trash. I could lose my job." Morrison stared at her for a long moment. Margaret kept her expression blank, helpless, exactly what he expected from someone like Ruth Martinez. Finally, he stepped back. "Get out. This office doesn't need cleaning tonight." "But the checklist says—" "I don't care what the checklist says. Get out." Margaret gathered her supplies with shaking hands and hurried out. Behind her, she heard Morrison opening the safe, checking the contents. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. He'd never know that copies of every document were now encrypted and transmitted to a secure server at Pacific Fleet Intelligence. Margaret made it to the maintenance shed before she allowed herself to breathe normally. Her phone buzzed. "Murphy. Got everything. Evidence is solid. We can move on your order." Margaret typed back, "Not yet. I need Morrison to make the next move. He's spooked. He'll either cover his tracks or eliminate the threat. Either way, we'll catch him in the act. Sullivan." "Maggie, if he sees you as a threat, this gets dangerous." Margaret looked at her mud-stained reflection again. "Good. Dangerous is when people reveal their true nature. Give me 48 hours. If Morrison's everything Park says he is, he'll make a mistake." She didn't have to wait 48 hours. She didn't even have to wait 12. At 0200, Margaret's encrypted phone buzzed with an alert. Someone was accessing Ruth Martinez's personnel file. Someone was looking into her background, her references, her previous employment. Someone was checking if Ruth Martinez was real. Margaret smiled in the darkness of her small off-base apartment, another part of her cover identity. Morrison had taken the bait. Now came the dangerous part. Now came the part where she had to make him believe Ruth Martinez was real enough to kill, but valuable enough to question first. She pulled out her phone and made a call. "Park, it's time. I need you to do exactly what I tell you, and I need you to trust me." "Who is this pig?" "The woman you've been protecting. The one who moves wrong. I need your help to finish what you started." A long pause. Then, "What do you need?" "I need you to tell Morrison that you've seen me photographing documents, that you think I'm working for the Inspector General's office, that I'm building a case against him. That'll make you a target. That's the point. Can you do it?" Another pause. "Yeah, I can do it. But whoever you really are, be ready. Morrison doesn't just destroy careers. He destroys people." "I'm counting on it," Margaret said, and ended the call. Outside her window, snow continued to fall on a city that wasn't built for winter. Tomorrow would bring ice cold, and the final confrontation she'd been preparing for since she was 12 years old, standing at her father's funeral, promising to make sure no one else's father died because the system protected the wrong people. Morrison wanted to see who Ruth Martinez really was. Soon he'd find out, and he was going to wish he'd never thrown that mud. Park made the call at 0630, right when Morrison arrived for morning formation. Margaret listened through the encrypted feed as Park delivered his lines perfectly. "Sir, I need to report something about the custodial worker, Ruth Martinez." Morrison's voice came through sharp with suspicion. "What about her?" "Yesterday evening I saw her in the records building. She was photographing documents with her phone. When she saw me, she left quickly. Too quickly for someone who's supposed to be slow and old." The silence stretched for 5 seconds. Margaret counted them, knowing Morrison's mind was racing through possibilities, connecting dots that would lead him exactly where she wanted him to go. "You're certain she was photographing documents?" "Yes, sir. I think she might be working for the IG's office. Or maybe she's press trying to build a story. Either way, she's not who she claims to be." Morrison's response was immediate. "Find her. Bring her to the training facility office. Don't make a scene. Don't alert anyone else. Just get her there within the hour." Margaret ended the feed and checked her appearance in the mirror. Ruth Martinez looked tired, worn down by too many early mornings and not enough pay. Perfect. She arrived at the admin building at 0700 exactly on schedule. Park was waiting by the entrance, his face carefully neutral. Ms. Martinez, Lieutenant Morrison needs to see you immediately. Something about your cleaning assignment yesterday. Margaret let worry cross her face. Did I do something wrong? I followed the checklist exactly. Just come with me, ma'am. He'll explain. They walked across the parade ground in silence. The snow had stopped, but ice covered everything, making each step treacherous. Margaret moved carefully, like someone afraid of falling. Park stayed close, protective in a way that seemed genuine, even though they were both acting. Whatever happens in there, Park said quietly, remember that some of us are trying to fix things. Not all of us are like him. Margaret squeezed his arm, the gesture Ruth Martinez would make. I know, son, I know. The training facility was empty except for Morrison, who stood by the window with his back to them. He didn't turn when they entered. Sergeant Park, wait outside. Make sure we're not disturbed. Park hesitated, then left. Margaret heard the door close behind her, the lock clicking into place. Morrison turned slowly. His face held something worse than anger, cold calculation. Ruth Martinez, is that really your name? Yes, sir. I showed my identification when I was hired. I've seen your identification. Driver's license, social security card, employment history. All perfect. Too perfect. He moved closer, circling her like a predator. I had someone run a deep background check last night. Want to know what they found? Margaret kept her expression confused. I don't understand, sir. Ruth Martinez exists. Born in El Paso in 1961. Worked custodial jobs in 3 different cities. Clean record, no red flags. But here's the interesting part. The real Ruth Martinez died 6 months ago in a car accident in Phoenix. Heart attack behind the wheel. Nobody noticed someone was using her identity because she had no family, no close friends. Just the kind of person someone could steal an identity from, and nobody would know. Margaret's pulse stayed steady. She'd expected this. The real Ruth Martinez had been dead for 8 months, not 6. Morrison's investigator had been sloppy. Sir, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm Ruth Martinez. I've been Ruth Martinez my whole life. Stop. Morrison's voice cut through her protest. I don't know who you are. IG, investigator, journalist, federal agent, doesn't matter. What matters is that you've been snooping around my operation, photographing documents, gathering evidence. That ends now. He pulled a phone from his pocket and made a call. Vickers, get to my office. Bring Thompson from medical. We have a situation. Margaret calculated her options. She could end this, now reveal her real identity, have Murphy's team storm the building. But Morrison hadn't confessed to anything specific yet. She needed him to incriminate himself completely, needed him to reveal everyone involved in his network. Sir, I really don't know what you think I did. I'm just a cleaning lady. You're just a cleaning lady who moves like someone with tactical training, who holds a mop like a weapon, who managed to get hired with perfect credentials from a dead woman. Morrison leaned against his desk. I actually respect it. Good cover, solid preparation. But you made one mistake. What's that? You underestimated how much I'm willing to do to protect what I've built. He gestured around the office. This isn't just about money. It's about proving that I'm not just Admiral Morrison's son, that I built something myself, and I'm not letting some undercover operative destroy it. Commander Vickers arrived first, her face tight with stress. Jake, what's going on? Our cleaning lady is a spy. We need to find out who she works for and what she knows. Vickers stared at Margaret. Are you serious? Dead serious. Check her phone. I guarantee it's not a standard civilian device. Margaret made a split-second decision. She pulled the phone from her pocket and threw it at Morrison's face. He jerked back reflexively, and she ran for the door. Locked. Of course it was locked. Morrison grabbed her from behind, one arm around her throat. Margaret could have broken the hold easily, 3 different ways, any of which would put him on the ground in seconds. But Ruth Martinez wouldn't know how to fight. Ruth Martinez would struggle weakly, ineffectively. So that's what Margaret did. Let me go. I didn't do anything wrong. Vickers, get her phone. Thompson, check the cart she left outside. I want to know what surveillance equipment she's carrying. Morrison forced Margaret into a chair. Vickers picked up the phone, encrypted military grade, completely out of place for a civilian cleaning woman. Her face went pale. Jake, this is a military device. If she's active duty, then we're dealing with an undercover operation, which means we need to know the scope before we respond. Morrison pulled out zip ties from his desk drawer. Thompson should have been here by now. Where the hell is he? The door opened, but it wasn't Thompson. Master Chief Patricia Sullivan stood in the doorway, 63 years old, with eyes that had seen 3 wars and a sidearm that had been drawn more times than most people could count. Behind her stood Captain James Murphy, intelligence officer, and Commander Lisa Washington, JAG attorney. Lieutenant Morrison, Sullivan said calmly, step away from the Vice Admiral. The room went silent. Morrison's grip loosened on Margaret's shoulder. What did you say? Margaret stood, shrugging off the last of Morrison's hold. When she spoke, her voice had lost Ruth Martinez's quaver, gained the command authority of someone who'd led thousands of personnel through combat operations. Master Chief Sullivan said to step away from me. I suggest you follow that order. Morrison stumbled backward, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, recognition. You can't be Vice Admiral Margaret Chen. Margaret pulled her real identification from an inner pocket she'd kept hidden under the custodial uniform. Commander of Pacific Fleet Intelligence Operations. And you, Lieutenant Morrison, are under investigation for corruption, fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States military. Vickers made a sound like someone had punched her. Oh God. Oh my God. Murphy stepped forward, a tablet in his hands. Commander Sarah Vickers, you're also under investigation. We have recorded conversations between you and Lieutenant Morrison discussing the sale of training positions, falsification of recruit records, and receipt of illegal payments. You have the right to remain silent. Wait! Vickers' voice cracked with panic. I can explain. Morrison said it was legal, said his father approved the program. Shut up, Sarah. Morrison's face had gone from pale to red. Don't say another word. Too late for that, Washington said, stepping forward with a folder. Lieutenant Morrison, these are arrest warrants for you, Commander Vickers, Lieutenant Thompson from medical records, and 6 other officers involved in your operation. You're all being charged with conspiracy, fraud, accepting bribes, and falsification of official military documents. Morrison's eyes locked on Margaret. The shock had passed, replaced by something uglier, calculation mixed with desperation. You think you've won? You think arresting me changes anything? He laughed, the sound harsh. My father is Admiral Richard Morrison. He has more stars on his shoulder than you'll ever have. One phone call and this entire investigation disappears. You'll be the one facing charges entrapment, exceeding authority, conducting an unauthorized undercover operation. Margaret moved closer, close enough that Morrison had to look up to meet her eyes. Your father is exactly why I conducted this investigation personally. Because 3 months ago we received a credible report that corruption at San Diego Naval Base went all the way to flag officer level. That someone in the Atlantic Fleet was protecting criminal activity. Your father's name came up 17 times in intercepted communications. She watched the color drain from Morrison's face again. So yes, Lieutenant, make that phone call. Call your father. Tell him his son was just arrested by Pacific Fleet Intelligence. Tell him that we have evidence of his involvement in protecting your criminal enterprise. Tell him that the Secretary of the Navy is being briefed on this investigation at 0900 today, and that arrest warrants for 2 flag officers will be issued within 24 hours. Morrison reached for his phone. Murphy intercepted his hand. You'll make that call from a secure facility, Lieutenant. After you've been read your full rights and had the opportunity to consult with an attorney. Not that you'll need one. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Sullivan moved to Margaret's side, her voice low. Are you okay, Admiral? Did he hurt you? Margaret shook her head. I'm fine, Master Chief, though I think I'll need physical therapy after spending a week on my knees scrubbing floors. How's Park? Secure. We extracted him as soon as Morrison made the call. He's giving his full statement now. Sullivan's expression hardened. Admiral, we found Thompson trying to destroy records in the medical building. He had a shredder going when we arrived. We saved most of the documents, but he managed to destroy some evidence. That's fine. We have copies of everything from Morrison's safe, plus the recordings from my surveillance equipment. Margaret turned to Vickers, who had collapsed into a chair crying. Commander Vickers, you have one opportunity to cooperate. Tell us everything about Admiral Morrison's involvement, and the JAG will consider reducing your charges. Vickers looked up, mascara running down her face. He knew everything. Admiral Morrison, I mean. He set up the Shell Corporation. He provided the contacts with defense contractors. He protected Jake whenever anyone reported problems. He said, her voice broke. He said we were making the Navy stronger by ensuring only the right kind of people got through training. People with proper connections, proper backgrounds. The right kind of people. Margaret's voice was flat. You mean wealthy people, white people, people who could afford to buy their way past standards that exist to keep all of us safe. I didn't think of it that way at first. Morrison made it sound like we were just being practical, working with reality. Reality is that 3 recruits you certified as qualified died in training accidents because they didn't have the actual physical capability to do the job. Margaret pulled out her tablet, showed Vickers 3 photographs. Petty Officer James Rodriguez, 22 years old, drowned during a water survival exercise because he couldn't actually swim the required distance. His training slot was purchased for $75,000. Seaman Alice Wong, 19. Killed in a vehicle rollover because she couldn't actually pass the defensive driving course. Training slot purchased for $60,000. Corporal Michael Stevens, 21. Died in a live fire exercise because his eyesight didn't meet minimum standards. Training slot purchased for $90,000. Margaret's voice didn't rise, but every word landed like a hammer. You didn't just defraud the military commander. You killed people. Young people who trusted that the system would protect them, who trusted that everyone in their unit was qualified to be there. You murdered them for money. Vickers was sobbing now, her entire body shaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know anyone would die. You knew the standards existed for a reason. You knew what you were doing when you falsified those records. Margaret turned away, unable to look at the woman anymore. Get her out of my sight. Washington led Vickers out. Morrison stood frozen, his face gray. 3 deaths, he whispered. There weren't supposed to be any deaths. The recruits were supposed to wash out in advanced training before they got into real danger. But they didn't wash out because your father's network kept protecting them, kept passing them along, kept falsifying records at every level. Margaret moved to the window, looking out at the parade ground where this had all started. How many others, Morrison? How many recruits are serving right now who aren't qualified? How many units have members who can't actually do the job, who are one crisis away from getting their teammates killed? Morrison didn't answer. He was staring at his hands like he'd never seen them before. Sullivan's phone buzzed. She checked it, her expression darkening. Admiral, we have a problem. Admiral Richard Morrison is on base. He's demanding to see his son. He's got 2 JAG attorneys with him, and he's threatening to have you arrested for unlawful detention. Margaret smiled without humor. Perfect. I was hoping he'd make this easy. Sullivan raised an eyebrow. Easy? Tell Admiral Morrison I'll meet him in the base commander's conference room in 15 minutes. Bring the full evidence package. And Sullivan. Make sure the Secretary of the Navy is on video conference for this meeting. I want witnesses to everything that happens next. 15 minutes later, Margaret stood in the conference room wearing a fresh uniform that Sullivan had brought. No more Ruth Martinez. No more pretending to be weak. Vice Admiral Margaret Chen, 3 stars gleaming on her shoulders, facing Admiral Richard Morrison across a polished table. Morrison was 62, silver-haired with the kind of rigid bearing that came from 40 years in uniform. His blue eyes, the same eyes his son had held absolute confidence. He'd walked into this meeting believing he had all the power. Vice Admiral Chen, I'm going to make this very simple. You've arrested my son based on fabricated evidence gathered through an illegal undercover operation. You exceeded your authority, violated proper chain of command, and conducted what amounts to entrapment. Release Lieutenant Morrison, immediately drop all charges and resign from your position. If you do this within the next hour, I'll ensure you face no criminal charges. If you refuse, I'll have you court-martialed and stripped of your commission. Margaret let him finish. Then she pressed a button on the conference table. A screen lit up behind her showing Secretary of the Navy Admiral Thomas Barrett watching from his Pentagon office. Admiral Morrison, the secretary said, his voice cold. You're on speaker. Everything you just said was recorded. I suggest you sit down and listen very carefully to what Vice Admiral Chen has to tell you." Morrison's confidence cracked. He sank into a chair. Margaret opened her tablet. "Admiral Morrison, 3 months ago, Naval Intelligence intercepted communications between a shell corporation called Patriot Defense Solutions and several military contractors. The communications suggested that training certifications were being sold, that unqualified recruits were being pushed through the system, and that someone in Fleet Command was protecting the operation. The investigation led to San Diego Naval Base and your son." She advanced to the next slide. "Rather than conduct a traditional investigation that would alert everyone involved, I requested permission to go undercover. The secretary approved my plan. For 1 week, I worked as a civilian custodian, documenting the scope of corruption at San Diego. What I found exceeded our worst estimates." The screen filled with documents, financial records, falsified training reports, communications between Morrison's son and defense contractors. "Your son has sold 73 training positions over 3 years, generating $4.2 million in illegal revenue. He falsified records for recruits who failed to meet physical, mental, or ethical standards. And he did it with your full knowledge and protection." "That's not," Morrison started. "Your son recorded your conversations, Admiral. He kept them as insurance in case his operation was discovered. He believed having evidence of your involvement would protect him." Margaret pulled up an audio file. "This conversation is from 2 months ago." Admiral Morrison's voice filled the room. "Jake, you need to be more careful. The IG's office is looking at procurement irregularities. Make sure all your contractor payments go through the offshore accounts I set up. And for God's sake, stop leaving paper trails." Jake Morrison's response: "Dad, relax. Nobody's going to investigate us. We're untouchable." Admiral Morrison: "We're untouchable as long as we're smart. The moment you get sloppy, the moment someone with actual authority starts asking questions, this whole thing collapses. So be smart." The audio ended. Admiral Morrison's face had gone ashen. "3 recruits are dead because of your operation," Margaret continued. 3 families destroyed. Dozens of units compromised by having unqualified personnel. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer money stolen. And you did it while wearing the uniform while claiming to serve your country." The secretary's voice came through the speakers. "Admiral Morrison, you're relieved of command effective immediately. You'll surrender yourself to NCIS within 2 hours for processing. Your service record will be reviewed and appropriate charges will be filed. Your retirement benefits are suspended pending investigation. Is that clear?" Morrison didn't respond. He was staring at the table, his 40-year career collapsing in real time. His JAG attorney tried to salvage something. "Admiral Chen, if my client cooperates fully, provides testimony against the defense contractors involved, would the Navy consider reducing charges?" "That's up to the Secretary and the Court-Martial Board," Margaret said. "But I'll make one thing clear. Cooperation means full disclosure. Names, dates, amounts. Every recruit whose records were falsified. Every contractor who paid bribes. Every officer who knew and looked the other way. Anything less than complete honesty, and your client faces the maximum penalty for each charge." The attorney nodded grimly. "I'll advise my client accordingly." Sullivan entered the conference room, her expression urgent. "Admiral Chen, we have another situation. Park just informed us that there's a 3rd Morrison involved, the Admiral's brother, Congressman Robert Morrison from Virginia. He's been using his position on the House Armed Services Committee to protect the operation, to block oversight investigations, and to threaten anyone who asks too many questions." Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't just military corruption. This was a family enterprise that reached into Congress. "Does Park have evidence?" "He's been collecting it for months. Financial records, recorded phone calls, emails. He said he didn't tell us before because he wasn't sure who he could trust. But now that Admiral Morrison is in custody, he's ready to provide everything." The secretary's voice cut through. "Vice Admiral Chen, I'm putting you in charge of the full investigation. You'll coordinate with FBI and congressional ethics investigators. This is now a joint military-civilian operation. I want everyone involved identified and charged within 90 days. "Understood, sir." Admiral Morrison finally spoke, his voice hollow. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. We were just trying to help families get their sons into service. make connections, build networks. It's how things have always worked. No, Margaret said firmly. It's how things worked when people like you had unchecked power, when wealthy white families could buy their way past standards while everyone else had to earn it. When connections mattered more than competence, that's over now. She gathered her materials and stood. Sullivan, make sure Admiral Morrison gets to NCIS processing. Murphy, coordinate with FBI on the contractor investigations. Washington, prepare the court-martial paperwork. I want every charge documented, every piece of evidence cataloged. This needs to be airtight. As Margaret left the conference room, she heard Admiral Morrison call out, "You think this changes anything? There are 100 more like me. You can't stop them all." Margaret paused at the door, looked back. "You're right. I can't stop them all, but I can make it clear that rank doesn't protect corruption, that family connections don't excuse criminal behavior, and that the military serves everyone. Not just the wealthy, not just the connected, not just the ones who look like you. That's a start." She walked out into the hallway where Park was waiting, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Sergeant Park, you did good work. Without your documentation, this investigation would have taken years." Park shook his head. "I should have come forward sooner. Those 3 recruits who died, maybe I could have prevented that. Maybe. Or maybe Morrison would have had you transferred to some remote post where you couldn't help anyone. You did what you could with the resources you had. That's all any of us can do. What happens to me now, Admiral? I was part of this operation for 6 months before I understood what it really was." "Will I face charges?" Margaret considered carefully. "You'll face administrative review. Your cooperation will be noted. If your testimony is complete and honest, I'll recommend no criminal charges. But you'll have to live with the knowledge that you were part of something that killed people. That's a punishment that doesn't end." Park's eyes were wet. "I know. I think about them every day. Rodriguez, Wong, Stevens. I looked up their families, read their obituaries. Wong's mother is still fighting to find out why her daughter died. The official report said equipment failure. It wasn't equipment failure. It was systematic failure. Moral failure." Margaret put her hand on Park's shoulder. "Help us make sure it never happens again. That's how you honor them." Her phone buzzed. "Murphy. Admiral, we've got a problem. Morrison made a call before we arrested him. He warned someone. 3 officers disappeared from the base in the last hour. Lieutenant Chen from procurement, Captain Williams from logistics, Commander Patterson from training evaluation. All part of the network. All gone." Margaret's jaw tightened. The investigation was far from over. Margaret was already moving before Murphy finished speaking. "Lock down the base. Nobody leaves without full identification verification. Get their photos to every gate, every checkpoint. I want Coast Guard monitoring the harbor in case they try to leave by water." Sullivan was on her radio before Margaret finished the sentence. "All units, base lockdown protocol. Code red. 3 suspects fleeing. Lieutenant Chen, Captain Williams, Commander Patterson. Consider them armed and dangerous." Park grabbed Margaret's arm. "Admiral Chen was planning something. 2 days ago, I overheard him talking about a contingency plan. He said if things went wrong, they had a way out that nobody would expect. I thought he was just being paranoid. What kind of contingency? He didn't say, but he mentioned the old submarine pens on the north side of the base, the ones that were decommissioned in the 90s. Margaret's mind raced. The old submarine pens had been sealed for 30 years, supposedly unusable. But if the Morrisons had been planning for exposure, they would have prepared escape routes that official channels wouldn't know about. Murphy, get a team to the North Submarine pens. Full tactical gear. If they've opened those pens, they might have a boat waiting. On it. But Admiral, those pens haven't been used since official records say they were sealed. But if Admiral Morrison has been running a corruption network for 3 years, he's had plenty of time to prepare back doors. Move. Margaret turned to Sullivan. "Master Chief, I need you to coordinate with NCIS. Make sure Admiral Morrison and his son are secured in separate facilities. I don't want them communicating, don't want them coordinating their stories. And put someone you trust on suicide watch. Men like the Admiral don't handle failure well." Sullivan nodded, but her expression was troubled. Admiral, there's something else. When we arrested Commander Vickers, she said something strange. She said, "At least the families will be safe now." I asked her what she meant, and she shut down completely. Wouldn't say another word. The families... Margaret felt ice settle in her stomach. What families? I don't know, but the way she said it, it sounded like a threat. Margaret pulled out her tablet and opened the files they'd recovered from Morrison's safe. She'd been focused on financial records on falsified training documents, but now she looked at the personal information sections. Every recruit whose training slot had been purchased came from wealthy families. Families with political connections, with money, with power. Families who would lose everything if their children's lack of qualifications became public. "Oh God," Margaret whispered. "It's not just about protecting the operation. It's about protecting the families who paid for it. If this goes public, those families will be destroyed. Park finished. Their kids will be dishonorably discharged. The parents will face fraud charges. Everything they built will collapse. And people like that will do anything to stop that from happening." Margaret's phone was already dialing. "Secretary Barrett, we have a situation. The families who purchased training slots, they're potential threats. If they believe exposure is imminent, they might take action to silence witnesses or destroy evidence." The secretary's voice was grim. "What kind of action? I don't know, but Vickers suggested families would be safe once we arrested Morrison. That implies they're currently in danger. From whom? From what?" "Admiral Chen, are you suggesting these families might resort to violence?" "I'm suggesting that people who've already committed fraud and conspiracy might be willing to go further to protect themselves. We need protective custody for key witnesses. Park the injured recruit Sofia Rodriguez, anyone else who can testify about the operation." "Approved. I'll have FBI coordinate witness protection. Admiral, how bad is this going to get?" Margaret looked at the list of names on her tablet. 73 recruits, 73 families, 73 potential threats. "Sir, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better." She ended the call just as an alarm blared across the base. Sullivan's radio crackled with urgent voices. "Gate 3 reports attempted breach. Vehicle tried to ram the barrier. Occupants fled on foot toward the industrial sector. Gate 7 has eyes on 3 suspects matching our fugitives. They're heading toward wait shots fired. Repeat shots fired at Gate 7. Margaret ran. Sullivan and Park followed, moving with the automatic coordination of people who'd spent their lives responding to crisis. They reached Gate 7 in 4 minutes to find 2 MPs on the ground, one bleeding from his shoulder, the other unconscious. What happened? Margaret knelt beside the injured MP, checking his wound. Through and through, clean exit. He'd survive if they got him to medical quickly. Captain Williams, ma'am. He pulled a sidearm when we tried to stop him. Shot Rodriguez, then pistol-whipped Chen before they could draw. They took our weapons and headed toward the water. How many weapons? 2 M9s, 1 M4 rifle. Full ammunition load. Sullivan was already on the radio. All unit suspects are armed with stolen military weapons. Deadly force is authorized if they pose immediate threat to personnel. Margaret stood her mind calculating distances, escape routes, possibilities. They're not trying to leave the base. They're heading toward the water, but not to escape. They're going somewhere specific. Park pointed toward the harbor. The submarine pens. They have to be. It's the only structure that direction that provides cover and access to water. Murphy, status on tactical team deployment. Murphy's voice came through stressed. Team is 2 minutes from the old pens. But Admiral, we've got a bigger problem. I just pulled up the original construction blueprints for those facilities. There's a tunnel system underneath maintenance access that connects to the commercial harbor outside base boundaries. If they reach that tunnel, they're gone. Margaret made a decision she knew would haunt her either way, it turned out. All teams converge on the submarine pens. But nobody enters until I arrive. These men are desperate armed, and they know we have enough evidence to end their lives, as they know them. They'll fight and people will die if we're not careful. Sullivan shook her head. Admiral, with respect, you shouldn't be anywhere near this. You're the primary investigator. If something happens to you, then Murphy takes over. But these men don't know me as Vice Admiral Chen. They know me as Ruth Martinez, the old cleaning lady who documented their crimes. That might buy us negotiating room. Margaret was already moving toward a jeep. I'm not asking permission, Master Chief. I'm giving an order. Let's move. The drive to the north end of the base took 6 minutes that felt like 6 hours. Margaret's hands were steady on the wheel, but her mind was racing through scenarios. Williams had shot an MP without hesitation. That meant the gloves were off, meant these weren't officers anymore. They were criminals who'd decided violence was their only option. The submarine pens emerged from the morning fog like concrete tombs. 4 massive structures, each designed to house nuclear submarines during the Cold War, now supposedly sealed and abandoned. But as Margaret approached, she saw what official records had missed: fresh tire tracks in the dirt, recently disturbed chains on the main access door, and most damning of all, light visible through cracks in the supposedly sealed structure. Murphy's tactical team was already in position, 12 operators in full gear spread around the perimeter. Murphy himself knelt behind a concrete barrier, his face tight with tension. Admiral, we've got movement inside. At least 3 distinct heat signatures. They know we're here. One of them yelled out about 5 minutes ago, said they had hostages and they'd kill anyone who tried to enter. Hostages who? We don't know. There shouldn't be anyone in these structures. But the thermal imaging shows 5 people inside, not 3. 2 of them aren't moving. Margaret felt her stomach drop. Injured or dead? Can't tell from here. But Admiral, if they've already killed someone, then we need to end this before they kill anyone else. Margaret pulled out her phone and dialed the number Park had given her for Lieutenant Chen's cell. It rang 4 times before someone answered. Who is this? Chen's voice was high-pitched with stress. Lieutenant Chen, this is Vice Admiral Margaret Chen. No relation, in case you're wondering. I need you to listen very carefully. A bitter laugh. The cleaning lady. Should have known. Morrison said you moved wrong, said something was off about you. We should have killed you when we had the chance. Margaret kept her voice calm. That would have been a mistake, Lieutenant. Just like shooting that MP was a mistake. Just like taking hostages is a mistake. Every action you take from this moment forward determines whether you spend the next 30 years in military prison or the rest of your life in a federal supermax facility. Choose carefully. You don't understand what's at stake here. We're not just protecting ourselves. We're protecting families, important families. People who trusted us, who paid us to help their children serve their country. You mean people who paid you to cheat the system? To put unqualified recruits into positions where they got themselves and others killed? That's not serving the country, Lieutenant. That's betraying it. Those deaths were accidents. We never intended. But you knew the risk. Margaret's voice hardened. You knew that falsifying physical standards meant some recruits wouldn't have the capability to survive training. You knew it, and you did it anyway because the money was too good to refuse. Now 3 young people are dead, and you're holding hostages because you're too cowardly to face the consequences of your actions. Silence on the line. Then, we want immunity, full immunity for ourselves and for the families who used our services. In exchange, we release the hostages and provide testimony against Admiral Morrison. You're not in a position to negotiate, Lieutenant. You shot an MP, you took hostages, you're armed with stolen weapons. You've added attempted murder and kidnapping to your charges. Why would I offer you anything? Because if you don't, everyone in this building dies. We've rigged the place with explosives, old demolition charges left over from when they decommissioned the pens. Enough C4 to bring this entire structure down. You want your hostages back alive? Give us immunity and a helicopter to the Mexican border. Margaret muted the phone and turned to Murphy. Can thermal imaging confirm explosives? Negative. But if they had access to this facility, they could have been staging supplies here for months. We have to assume the threat is real. Sullivan leaned in. Admiral, we can't give them immunity. The precedent alone would destroy military justice. Every corrupt officer would take hostages and demand the same deal. I know. Margaret unmuted the phone. Lieutenant Chen, I can't offer you immunity, but I can offer you a chance to minimize your sentence. Release the hostages unharmed, surrender your weapons, and cooperate fully with the investigation. I'll personally recommend to the court-martial board that your cooperation be considered during sentencing. That's not good enough. We want... An explosion cut off Chen's words, not from the submarine pen, from somewhere else on the base. Margaret's radio erupted with panicked voices. Explosion at the admin building. Multiple casualties, fire, spreading to adjacent structures. Gate 5 under attack. Armed civilians attempting to breach the base. This is medical, we're overwhelmed. Need all available personnel. Margaret's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about 3 fugitive officers. This was coordinated. This was planned. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Vice Admiral Chen. The voice was male, older cultured. My name is Robert Morrison. I believe you've arrested my brother and nephew. Congressman Robert Morrison, the third leg of the criminal triangle. Congressman, if you're calling to negotiate their release, I'm calling to explain reality to you, Admiral. The explosion you just heard, that's a taste of what happens when you threaten powerful families. The people whose children my brother helped, they're not going to let you destroy their lives. They have resources, they have connections, and they're willing to use both to protect themselves. You're threatening me. I'm informing you. Right now, there are 12 separate actions underway. Some you know about the explosion, the gate attack. Others you don't. By the end of this day, you'll understand that some fights can't be won through official channels. Some people are simply too powerful to touch. Margaret's mind was racing. 12 actions. That meant 9 more threats she didn't know about. 9 more potential casualties. Congressman, if you're coordinating terrorist attacks on a United States military base. I'm not coordinating anything, Admiral. I'm simply connected to people who are very protective of their interests. Release my brother and nephew. Drop all charges related to the training program. In exchange, the attacks stop. The families back down. Everyone goes home alive. And the 3 dead recruits, Rodriguez, Wong, Stevens. What about their families? Unfortunate accidents in a dangerous profession. Nothing more. Morrison's voice was cold. You have 30 minutes to decide, Admiral. After that, the attacks escalate. And I promise you the blood of everyone who dies will be on your hands, not mine. The line went dead. Margaret stood frozen for 3 seconds, her mind processing impossible choices. Then training took over. She turned to Sullivan and Murphy. Master Chief, get every available person to the admin building. Murphy, coordinate with base security. I want details on every attack. Who, what, where. And get FBI on the line. This is now a domestic terrorism case. Park grabbed her arm. Admiral, you can't actually be considering giving in to them. I'm not considering anything except stopping more people from dying. Margaret pulled up her tablet, opened the files on the families who'd purchased training slots. 73 families. How many were involved in this attack? How many were willing to kill to protect their secrets? Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. 28 minutes remaining. The next target is the elementary school on base. 147 children currently in classes. Your choice, Admiral. Margaret felt something break inside her chest. Not fear, she'd faced fear too many times to count. This was rage, pure and cold, at people who would threaten children to protect their own criminal behavior. She made a call. Secretary Barrett, I need emergency authority, full tactical response authorization. These people have threatened to attack the base elementary school. Granted. Whatever you need, Admiral. But be advised, we've identified some of the families involved. 2 state senators, a federal judge, 3 CEOs of defense contractors, multiple high-ranking military officers from other branches. If you go after them, then we go after them. Sir, they're threatening to kill children. I don't care who their parents are or how many connections they have. This ends now. Margaret turned to Murphy. Get every parent notified. Evacuate the school. And I want sniper teams on every building with line of sight to that school. If anyone approaches with hostile intent, they go down hard. Admiral, if we kill civilians. They stopped being civilians when they started planning terrorist attacks. Move. Sullivan was coordinating evacuation procedures, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. Park stood nearby, his face pale but determined. And in the submarine pen, 3 fugitive officers waited with hostages, believing they held all the cards. Margaret walked toward the pen's main entrance alone, hands visible and empty. Murphy shouted something behind her, but she didn't stop. She'd spent a week being underestimated, being treated like she was worthless. Now it was time to remind everyone exactly who Vice Admiral Margaret Chen was. She stopped 20 feet from the entrance and called out, "Lieutenant Chen, I'm coming in to negotiate. I'm unarmed. I'm alone. I want to see the hostages alive, and then we'll discuss terms." Silence. Then the heavy door scraped open. Captain Williams appeared, his stolen M4 rifle pointed at Margaret's chest. His hands were shaking, sweat dripping down his face despite the cold. "You're crazy, lady. Coming in here alone, maybe, but I need to see who you're holding. Need to verify they're alive before I can authorize any kind of negotiation." Williams grabbed her arm and pulled her inside. The submarine pen was massive, designed to hold vessels 100 feet long. But it was the two people zip-tied to support columns that made Margaret's heart stop. One was a young woman, maybe 25, wearing a Navy lieutenant's uniform. Her face was bruised blood trickling from her nose. The other was Sofia Rodriguez, the 19-year-old recruit who'd been assaulted by Jake Morrison, whose jaw had been fractured, who'd been threatened into silence. "You bastards," Margaret said quietly. "You took a victim of your own crimes and made her a hostage." Commander Patterson stepped forward, his face twisted with desperate fury. She was going to testify. Her testimony alone would destroy everything. "We had to." "You had to what? Kidnap her? Threaten to kill her? How does that help your situation?" "It gives us leverage." Lieutenant Chen was pacing his weapon, swinging wildly. "Rodriguez dies, her testimony disappears. Lieutenant Foster here." He gestured to the other hostage. "She's Admiral Barrett's daughter, the secretary's only child. You think he'll authorize an assault when his daughter's life is on the line?" Margaret felt the puzzle pieces slot into place. This wasn't just about the Morrisons anymore. They'd kidnapped the Secretary of the Navy's daughter. That was why Congressman Morrison had been so confident. That was why he'd given her 30 minutes. Because he knew that once Secretary Barrett learned his daughter was a hostage, the entire investigation would collapse. "Does the Secretary know?" Margaret asked quietly. Williams smiled, cruel and certain. "He knows. We sent him a photo 10 minutes ago. Want to bet on how long before he calls you and orders you to stand down?" Margaret's phone rang. Secretary Barrett's number. She answered, putting it on speaker so the fugitives could hear. "Yes, sir. Admiral Chen." The secretary's voice was completely flat, drained of all emotion. "My daughter is inside that facility. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. I've confirmed her presence. She appears injured but alive." "Then you will do whatever is necessary to ensure her safe return. Is that understood?" "Sir, with respect." "That's an order, Admiral. Whatever they want, give it to them. I will not sacrifice my daughter." The fugitives were grinning now, convinced they'd won. Margaret looked at the two hostages, at Sofia Rodriguez, who'd survived assault only to become leverage in her attacker's escape, and at Lieutenant Foster, who'd done nothing wrong except have the wrong father. Then Margaret looked at the phone and made the hardest decision of her career. "No, sir." The silence that followed Margaret's refusal stretched for 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. Then Secretary Barrett's voice exploded through the phone. "What did you just say to me, Admiral?" "I said no, sir. I will not negotiate with terrorists. I will not release criminals who've killed 3 service members and kidnapped 2 more. And I will not set a precedent that says holding hostages gets you what you want." "That's my daughter in there." "I know, sir. And I'm sorry. But if we give in now, every corrupt officer in the military will know that kidnapping works. Every criminal will understand that threatening families gets results. We can't. I don't give a damn about precedent. That's my child." Williams was laughing now, his rifle trained on Margaret's chest. "You hear that, Admiral? Your boss just told you to stand down. Game over. We win." Margaret ignored him, kept her attention on the phone. "Sir, you appointed me to command Pacific Fleet Intelligence because you trusted my judgment. I'm asking you to trust it now. I can get your daughter out alive, but not by surrendering to these men." How are you going to save her when they're holding her at gunpoint?" Because I'm standing right next to her, sir. Because I walked in here unarmed and alone, and they let me in because they think I'm helpless. They think I'm weak." The fugitive's expression shifted from triumph to uncertainty. Chen took a step forward, his weapon rising. "What are you talking about?" Margaret smiled, the expression cold as winter steel. "I'm talking about the fact that you're amateurs playing at terrorism, and I spent 5 years running operations in places where actual terrorists would eat you for breakfast. I'm talking about the fact that Murphy's tactical team has had sniper overwatch on this building since I walked through that door. I'm talking about the fact that every word you've said has been transmitted to federal prosecutors who are right now preparing terrorism charges that will put you away for life even if we dropped every corruption charge." She took a step toward Chen, who stumbled backward. "And I'm talking about the fact that I've been counting your mistakes since I entered this room. You're holding rifles, but neither of you has your finger on the trigger. You're scared of accidentally firing. You're standing together instead of spread out. One stun grenade would incapacitate both of you. And you tied your hostages to support columns with zip ties, which means..." Margaret moved. 3 years of martial arts training compressed into 2 seconds of explosive violence. She grabbed Chen's rifle barrel, twisted it away from her body, and drove her elbow into his throat. He went down gasping. She spun, using the momentum to kick William's weapon aside, then swept his legs out from under him. Patterson tried to run. Margaret let him take 3 steps, then spoke into her collar mic hidden under her uniform jacket the entire time. "Target running. Take him." The door burst open. Murphy's tactical team swarmed in, weapons trained, moving with the practiced precision of operators who'd done this 100 times. Patterson hit the ground face first, 3 operators on him before he could draw the sidearm tucked in his belt. Margaret knelt beside Sofia Rodriguez, cutting the zip ties with a knife Murphy handed her. "You're safe now. I'm sorry they took you. I'm sorry we didn't protect you better." Sofia was crying, her whole body shaking. They said if I testified my family would pay. They knew where my mother lives, where my little brother goes to school. They said..." "They lied. Your family is in protective custody right now. FBI picked them up an hour ago. They're safe, and you're safe, and these men are never going to hurt anyone again." Lieutenant Foster was trying to stay composed, but her hands trembled as Margaret freed her. "My father, does he know I'm okay?" Margaret handed her the phone. "Tell him yourself." While Foster talked to her father, Margaret walked to where Chen lay on the floor, still struggling to breathe around his crushed larynx. She knelt beside him, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "You threatened children. You took a sexual assault victim and used her as leverage. You fired on military personnel. Every single action you took today moved you further from corruption charges and closer to capital terrorism charges. Right now, federal prosecutors are debating whether to pursue the death penalty." "Want to know what I think?" Chen's eyes were wide with terror. "I think you're a coward who relied on your connections to protect you from consequences your entire life. I think you never expected to face real accountability. And I think you're about to spend the next 40 years learning what accountability feels like." She stood. "Medics will treat your throat. After that, you're going to a black site detention facility where the only people you'll see are interrogators. No lawyers, no family visits, not until you've told us everything about every family involved in this operation. That's terrorism law, Lieutenant. Once you threaten national security, your rights become negotiable." Margaret walked out of the submarine pen into morning light that hurt her eyes after the darkness inside. Sullivan was waiting, her face tight with stress that released into relief when she saw Margaret alive and unharmed. "Admiral, that was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. Probably both. Definitely both." Margaret's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Status on the other attacks. Elementary school was evacuated. Sniper teams spotted 2 suspects approaching with what looked like weapons. They were taken down before they reached the perimeter, both alive in custody. Admin building fire is contained. 3 casualties, all non-life-threatening. Gate attacks were repelled. Turns out they were just civilian contractors paid by Congressman Morrison to create chaos. They surrendered as soon as they met real resistance. So it was all theater. Morrison was betting that the threat alone would be enough to make us back down. It almost worked, Sullivan said quietly. When Secretary Barrett ordered you to negotiate, he was a father first and secretary second in that moment. I don't blame him. But we can't set that precedent. We can't show that threatening families works. Margaret's phone rang. Congressman Morrison again. She answered with savage satisfaction. Congressman, I assume you've heard that your assault teams failed. You don't understand what you've done. Morrison's cultured voice had frayed, showing the panic underneath. Those families, they're not going to forgive this. They're not going to forget. You've made enemies of some of the most powerful people in America. Good. Let them come after me. Let them try to use their power and their connections. Because every action they take from this point forward gives us more evidence, more charges, more ammunition to use against them. Margaret's voice was hard. You wanted to protect your brother and nephew. Instead, you just gave us a terrorism conspiracy that reaches into Congress, state governments, and multiple corporate boards. By the end of this week, we'll have arrested 50 people. By the end of the month, that number will double. And you, Congressman Morrison, are going to be the first legislator charged under the Patriot Act for coordinating attacks on a military installation. You can't prove I coordinated anything. I just made a phone call. A phone call in which you detailed specific ongoing attacks and threatened more if we didn't comply. A phone call we recorded and are currently playing for the FBI director. A phone call that constitutes conspiracy to commit terrorism. Margaret paused. How does it feel, Congressman? How does it feel to realize that your connections won't save you, that your power has limits, that you're just another criminal facing justice? Morrison hung up. Margaret turned to find Murphy approaching, his expression grim. Admiral, we've got a situation at the detention facility. Admiral Morrison, the Admiral, not his son, he tried to hang himself in his cell. Guards cut him down in time, but he's in medical now. Unconscious, critical condition. Margaret felt nothing. No sympathy, no triumph, just a cold acknowledgement of cause and effect. Put guards on him. If he survives, I want him prosecuted. If he doesn't... She paused. If he doesn't make sure his death doesn't close the investigation, we need everyone in his network identified and charged. Already on it. But Admiral, his wife, is demanding to see him. She's threatening to go to the media to claim we tortured him, that the suicide attempt proves his innocence. Let her talk to the media. Let her tell them her husband ran a criminal conspiracy that killed 3 service members. Let her explain how he protected his son's operation that threatened children. Some people won't care, but most people will see the truth. Park appeared from the direction of the admin building, his face smudged with smoke. Admiral, they're asking for you at the hospital. One of the casualties from the explosion, he's asking to speak with you specifically. Won't talk to anyone else. Margaret followed Park to the base hospital, her mind already cycling through possibilities. Who would demand to speak with her? One of the attackers. A witness with crucial information. The injured man was in his 40s, wearing civilian clothes, his left arm wrapped in bandages. He looked up when Margaret entered, and his eyes filled with tears. Admiral Chen, I'm Thomas Rodriguez, Sophia's father. Margaret's chest tightened. Rodriguez. The same last name as one of the dead recruits. Sir, your daughter is safe. She's being treated here in the hospital, but she'll make a full recovery. I know. They told me. Rodriguez's voice broke. I came here this morning to try to see her, to apologize for not believing her when she first told me about Morrison. I was at the admin building when the bomb went off. I got lucky, just some cuts and burns. But Admiral, I need to tell you something. Something I should have reported months ago. What is it? My nephew, James Rodriguez. He died 3 years ago in a training accident. Drowned during water survival training. The official report said he panicked that he froze up. But James was a competitive swimmer. He'd been swimming since he was 5 years old. There's no way he just froze. Margaret pulled up her tablet, found the file on James Rodriguez. 22 years old, training slot purchased for $75,000, falsified swimming qualifications. Mr. Rodriguez, did your family pay for James's training position? Rodriguez's face crumpled. My brother did. James's father. He paid some company Patriot Defense something because James had failed the initial qualification tests. They said they could fix it, could make sure James got through training. My brother didn't know. None of us knew that they were falsifying records. We thought it was legitimate thought they were just coaching him to pass the tests. How much did your brother pay? $75,000, his entire retirement savings. He believed he was helping his son serve the country. When James died, my brother killed himself 3 months later. Couldn't live with the guilt. Rodriguez grabbed Margaret's hand. Admiral, my brother wasn't a bad man. He was desperate. James was his only child, and James wanted to serve so badly. When the recruiters said James didn't meet physical standards, my brother thought he was helping. He didn't know he was signing his son's death warrant. Margaret's anger, which had been directed at the corrupt officers and the wealthy families who knowingly cheated the system, found a new target, the Morrisons, who'd preyed on desperate families, who'd sold hope and delivered death. Mr. Rodriguez, your brother and your nephew were victims. The Morrisons exploited their dream of service and turned it into profit. That's not on your family. That's on them. But Sophia, when she was assaulted when she came to me for help, I didn't believe her. I told her she must have misunderstood, that officers don't do things like that. I made her go back to the base, back to the place where Morrison had access to her. I failed her just like I failed James. No, sir. You were manipulated by a system designed to protect officers at the expense of enlisted personnel. You trusted the uniform, trusted the chain of command. That trust was betrayed. That's not your failure, it's theirs. Rodriguez pulled out a folder from the bag beside his bed. I've been collecting these for 3 years. Every family I could find whose child died in training accidents at San Diego. Every suspicious incident, every case where the official report didn't match what the families knew about their children's capabilities. There are 17 of them, Admiral. 17 young people who died because they weren't qualified to be where the Morrisons put them. Margaret took the folder, her hands unsteady. 3 deaths, she'd thought there were 3 deaths. Now Rodriguez was telling her there were 17. How many more had she missed? How many more families were grieving children who died because of corruption? She opened the folder and started reading. Each case was documented with obsessive detail, training records, autopsy reports, witness statements, family testimonies. Rodriguez had spent 3 years building a case that no one would listen to because he was just a grieving uncle with no official authority. Why didn't you bring this to someone sooner? I tried. Rodriguez's voice was bitter. I went to the Inspector General's office. They said training accidents happened, that the mortality rate was within acceptable parameters. I went to my congressman, who turned out to be Robert Morrison. He promised to investigate, and then nothing happened. I went to the media, but they wouldn't publish without official confirmation of wrongdoing. Everyone I talked to said the same thing. The military investigated, found no criminal activity, and the cases were closed. Tim, because the Morrisons controlled the investigations. They made sure anyone who asked questions was shut down or transferred. Margaret closed the folder. Mr. Rodriguez, this evidence, it's going to be crucial to the prosecution. With your permission, I'd like to make it part of the official investigation. Take it. Use it. Just promise me one thing, Admiral. What's that? Promise me that every family who lost someone because of the Morrisons will know the truth. Not the sanitized version, not the politically convenient version. The real truth about what killed their children. Margaret met his eyes. I promise. Every family will get answers. Every death will be investigated. And everyone responsible will face justice. She left the hospital and walked directly to the command center where Murphy and Sullivan were coordinating the ongoing investigation. She dropped Rodriguez's folder on the table. We missed 14 deaths. 14 more victims of the Morrison operation. We need to reopen every training fatality at San Diego for the last 5 years. Every single one. Murphy opened the folder, his face going pale as he read. Admiral, if there are 14 more families, then there are 14 more potential witnesses for the prosecution, and probably 14 more families who paid the Morrisons to cheat the system. We need to approach them carefully. Some of them may be victims like Rodriguez's brother, but others may be knowing participants who'll fight exposure. Sullivan was already on her computer, pulling up training fatality records. Admiral, if we're expanding the investigation to this scope, we're going to need more resources. This isn't just San Diego anymore. We need to look at every base where Admiral Morrison had influence, every training facility in the Pacific Fleet. Request it. Full investigative team, unlimited resources. I want every death examined, every falsified record identified, every family contacted. This ends completely, or it doesn't end at all. Margaret's phone buzzed with a message from Washington, the JAG officer. Lieutenant Morrison just asked to speak with you. Says he has information about his father's network that he'll only share with you personally. Could be a trap, could be legitimate cooperation. Your call. Margaret looked at Sullivan and Murphy. Thoughts? It's a trap, Sullivan said immediately. He's going to try to manipulate you, try to cut a deal that protects his father. Murphy shook his head. Maybe, but he might also be scared. His father just tried to kill himself. Morrison's seeing what failure looks like, what consequences feel like. He might be ready to save himself. Or he might be ready to eliminate the person who destroyed his family. Sullivan's hand moved to her sidearm. If you're going to meet with him, I'm coming with you. Non-negotiable. Margaret nodded. Both of you come. Murphy, bring recording equipment. If Morrison wants to confess, I want every word documented. They arrived at the detention facility 20 minutes later. Lieutenant Jake Morrison sat in an interrogation room, his hands cuffed to a metal table, his dress uniform replaced by a gray prison jumpsuit. He looked up when Margaret entered, and something like hatred flashed in his eyes before being replaced by careful neutrality. Admiral Chen, or should I call you Ruth? I keep picturing you in that custodial uniform with mud on your face. You looked so pathetic. I actually felt sorry for you. Save the tough talk, Morrison. Your attorney said you had information to share. Either share it or I'm leaving. Morrison leaned back, his cuffed hands forcing an awkward posture. My father's dying. The doctors say even if they save him, he'll have brain damage from oxygen deprivation. He'll never stand trial. Never face real consequences for what he built. That's his choice. He decided suicide was preferable to accountability. No. Morrison's voice was hard. He decided suicide was preferable to facing what he did to me, to my mother, to everyone he manipulated into participating in his operation. He paused. My father didn't build this network to make money. Money was just the tool. He built it to prove he was superior to everyone else, that rules didn't apply to people like us. And he raised me to believe the same thing. Is this going somewhere, Lieutenant? I was 8 years old the first time my father told me that some people were born to lead, and others were born to follow. That our family was special, chosen, destined for greatness. He showed me how to cheat on tests, how to manipulate teachers, how to use our name to get what we wanted. By the time I was 12, I believed that rules were for other people, that I was untouchable. Morrison's eyes were wet now. I believed it right up until the moment your tactical team burst into that conference room. Right up until I saw that you weren't Ruth Martinez at all, that you were a vice admiral who'd spent a week documenting every crime I'd committed. That's when I realized my father lied. I'm not special. I'm not untouchable. I'm just a criminal who got caught. Margaret felt no sympathy. Morrison, if you're looking for forgiveness... I'm not looking for forgiveness. I'm looking for revenge. Morrison leaned forward as far as his restraints allowed. My father destroyed me. He convinced me I was invincible. And then when I got caught, he tried to kill himself rather than face the consequences. He's going to die believing he was right, believing that he was too good for prison, too important to face justice. I'm not going to let that happen. What are you offering? Everything. Every family that paid us, every officer that participated, every contractor that gave us kickbacks, every falsified record, every bribe, every threat. I kept copies of everything insurance, in case my father tried to cut me loose. I've got evidence stored in 3 separate locations. Digital files, paper documents, recorded conversations, enough to bring down everyone in the network. Murphy stepped forward. Why turn on your father? Why not use that evidence to negotiate your own deal? Because I'm already facing terrorism charges for the hostage situation. There's no deal that saves me from that. I'm going to prison for the rest of my life, no matter what I do. Morrison's voice was hollow. But I can make sure my father's legacy is destroyed. I can make sure everyone knows that Admiral Richard Morrison wasn't a hero. He was a criminal who corrupted the military he pretended to serve. That's worth more to me than any deal you could offer. Margaret studied him, looking for deception, for manipulation. All she saw was broken certainty, the desperate rage of someone who just realized his entire worldview was a lie. If we do this, you give us everything. Total cooperation. You testify against everyone in the network, including your father, if he survives. You accept full responsibility for your actions, and you don't get to negotiate your sentence. You take whatever the court-martial board gives you. Agreed. On one condition. You're not in a position to make conditions. Just one. Morrison's voice cracked. I want to see the families of Rodriguez, Wong, and Stevens, the three who died because I certified them as qualified when they weren't. I want to apologize to them in person. I want them to see my face when I tell them it was my fault their children died. Sullivan made a disgusted sound. You think apologizing helps them? You think anything you say makes their loss easier? No. But I think they deserve to see the man who killed their children face consequences. They deserve to know I'm not hiding behind lawyers or deals or my father's reputation. And I deserve, he swallowed hard, I deserve to feel what I did to them, to carry that weight every day for the rest of my life. Margaret made a decision. Set up the meetings. Rodriguez first, his father is already on base. Then Wong's mother and Stephen's parents. Morrison speaks, they respond however they need to, and we document everything. If he's genuinely remorseful, it goes in his file. If he's performing, the families will see through it. Washington had been silent until now, but she spoke up with caution in her voice. Admiral, this is highly irregular. Victim-offender mediation usually happens much later in the process after sentencing, and it requires the victims to consent to agree to participate. Then ask them. Explain that Morrison wants to apologize, that he's cooperating with the investigation. Let them decide if they want to hear what he has to say. Margaret turned back to Morrison. You give us the evidence locations now. We verify it's legitimate. Then and only then do we arrange the meetings. Understood? Morrison nodded. He rattled off 3 addresses: a storage unit in National City, a safe deposit box at a bank in La Jolla, and a cloud server with encrypted access credentials. Murphy left immediately to coordinate recovery of the evidence. Margaret stood to leave, but Morrison called out. Admiral, why did you do it? Why spend a week being humiliated, being treated like garbage when you could have just shown up with a warrant and arrested everyone? Margaret turned back. Because corruption hides in the gaps between what's legal and what's right. Because powerful people protect each other, and the only way to break through that protection is to document everything so thoroughly that no lawyer can defend it, and no politician can ignore it. And because 3 young people died on your watch, and I owed it to them to make sure you faced real consequences, not just a slap on the wrist and a quiet retirement. She walked out, leaving Morrison alone with the weight of what he'd done. Sullivan caught up with her in the hallway. Admiral, do you really think he's genuine? Or is this just another manipulation? Does it matter if he's genuine? We get justice for 17 families and we dismantle a network that's been corrupting military training for years. If he's manipulating us, we still get all the evidence and all the prosecutions. We just don't recommend leniency at his sentencing. Either way, we win. They walked out into afternoon sunlight that felt wrong after everything that had happened. Margaret's phone wouldn't stop buzzing messages from the Pentagon, from FBI, from media outlets that had somehow already heard about the base lockdown and explosions. The story was breaking wide open, spreading faster than anyone could control it. Secretary Barrett called. His voice was steady again, back to being an officer instead of a terrified father. Admiral Chen, my daughter told me what you did. Walking in there unarmed, refusing to negotiate taking down those men yourself. She said you saved her life. I did my job, sir. Nothing more. That's not what Lieutenant Foster said. She said you could have authorized a tactical assault, could have stayed outside where it was safe. But you walked in alone because you knew they wouldn't shoot a woman they'd spent days underestimating. You used their contempt as a weapon. Margaret thought about that. Maybe. Or maybe I just got tired of being underestimated and decided to show them exactly what a mistake they'd made. Barrett laughed, the sound carrying relief and pride. Either way, Admiral, you have my thanks. And my apology. When I ordered you to negotiate, you were a father protecting his daughter. I'd have done the same in your position. Maybe. But you didn't. You chose duty over my order, chose principle over the easy path. That took courage. I'm not sure I would have had. Margaret ended the call and found herself standing alone in front of the submarine pens where it had all come to a head. 24 hours ago, she'd been Ruth Martinez, invisible and dismissed. Now she was Vice Admiral Chen, again visible and powerful. But she'd never forget what it felt like to be Ruth Martinez. Never forget the cold mud on her face, the ice water soaking through her clothes, the laughter of 200 recruits who saw nothing in her worth respecting. That was the reality. Thousands of people faced every day. People who were judged not by their capability, but by their age, their appearance, their perceived status. People who were invisible until someone powerful decided to notice them. Margaret pulled out her phone and called Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez, Lieutenant Morrison wants to apologize to you in person. You have every right to refuse, but if you choose to meet him, I'll be there with you. You'll be safe and you'll get to say whatever you need to say. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Will it help the case? Will my meeting him make it more likely he faces justice? He's already facing justice, but your participation might help us reach other families, might encourage them to come forward with their own stories. That helps us understand the full scope of what the Morrisons did. Then I'll do it. Not for him, for James, and for Sophia, and for all the other families who deserve to know what really happened to their children. Margaret made arrangements for the meeting to happen the following morning, then finally allowed herself to head back to her temporary quarters. Her body ached from the tactical takedown, from the week of physical labor, from the accumulated stress of running an investigation while undercover. But as she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not in her rank or her accomplishments, but in the simple fact that she'd stood up when others couldn't, that she'd refused to let power and connections triumph over justice, that she'd remembered who she was fighting for, even when it would have been easier to walk away. Her father's brass chevrons sat on her nightstand, worn smooth from decades of handling. She picked them up, felt their familiar weight. "We got them, Dad," she whispered into the darkness. "All of them, just like I promised." Outside, the base was slowly returning to normal. But nothing would ever be quite the same. Not for the families who'd lost children. Not for the officers who'd participated in corruption. And not for Vice Admiral Margaret Chen, who'd spent a week being invisible so she could see everything that needed to change. Morning came too soon. Margaret stood outside the conference room at 0700 watching through the window as Thomas Rodriguez sat alone at the table. His hands clasped so tightly, his knuckles had gone white. Sullivan stood beside her, armed and vigilant. "You sure about this?" Admiral Rodriguez is barely holding it together. "If Morrison says the wrong thing, then Rodriguez gets to respond however he needs to. That's the point." Margaret opened the door. "Mr. Rodriguez, Lieutenant Morrison will be here in 5 minutes. You can still back out if you want." Rodriguez shook his head. "I need to do this. For James. For my brother. I need to look this man in the eye and understand how someone could do what he did." 2 guards escorted Morrison into the room, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked worse than yesterday, eyes red from lack of sleep. Face pale, shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. When he saw Rodriguez, something crumpled in his expression. "Mr. Rodriguez, Morrison's voice broke. "I don't know how to start." "Then don't." Rodriguez's voice was flat, emotionless. "Don't try to explain. Don't try to justify. Just tell me the truth. Did you know my nephew couldn't swim well enough to pass the water survival test?" Morrison sat down heavily. "Yes, I knew. His evaluation showed he could barely complete 1 lap in a pool. The test required swimming a 1/4 mile in open ocean. I knew he'd fail. But you certified him anyway." I certified him anyway. His father paid $75,000. My father told me the money was more important than the standards. That James would wash out in advanced training before he got into real danger. That it was just a temporary problem that would resolve itself. Rodriguez's hands were shaking. James didn't wash out. James drowned. He panicked in the water, went under, and by the time the instructors reached him, he was already gone. My brother got the call at work. He collapsed right there in the break room, heart attack from the shock. He survived, but something broke inside him that day. 3 months later, he walked into his garage, closed the door, and started the car. They found him the next morning. Morrison was crying now, silent tears running down his face. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know sorry doesn't bring them back or fix what I broke, but I am sorry. I was wrong. I was evil. I killed your nephew and I killed your brother, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life. Do you? Rodriguez leaned forward. Because from where I'm sitting, you don't seem to be living with it at all. You're still breathing. You're still walking around. You get to wake up every morning. James doesn't. My brother doesn't. So tell me, Lieutenant Morrison, what does your guilt actually cost you? Morrison had no answer. Margaret watched him struggle, watched him search for words that didn't exist. Finally, he said the only thing he could say. You're right. My guilt costs me nothing compared to what your family lost. And that's not fair. That's not justice. But Admiral Chen is giving me a chance to try to fix some of what I broke. I'm giving testimony against everyone in the network. I'm providing evidence that will send dozens of people to prison. It won't bring James back, but maybe it prevents the next James from dying because someone cheated the system. Rodriguez stared at him for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked out without another word. Sullivan followed him, leaving Margaret alone with Morrison. That went well, Morrison said bitterly. What did you expect, that he'd forgive you, that you'd feel better after apologizing? Margaret's voice was harsh. You don't get to feel better, Morrison. You get to carry what you did forever. That's not punishment, that's just reality. She left him sitting alone with his guilt and went to find Rodriguez in the hallway. He was leaning against the wall, his whole body shaking with suppressed rage. I wanted to kill him. I wanted to reach across that table and strangle him with my bare hands. Is that wrong? Does that make me as bad as he is? No, Margaret said firmly. It makes you human. It makes you someone who loved his family and lost them because of someone else's greed. Wanting justice, wanting vengeance, that's natural. What matters is that you didn't act on it. You chose to let the system handle him, instead of taking matters into your own hands. That takes more strength than violence ever could. Rodriguez wiped his eyes. When do I testify? When do I get to tell a court-martial board what the Morrisons did to my family? In approximately 3 months. Murphy's team is still gathering evidence, still building the case. But when the trial happens, you'll be our first witness. Your testimony will set the foundation for everything that follows. The next meeting was harder. Alice Wong's mother arrived at the base at 0900, a small woman in her 60s who looked like the weight of grief had physically compressed her. Her English was limited, so her daughter Alice's older sister came with her to translate. Morrison stood when they entered, and Mrs. Wong's reaction was immediate and visceral. She started screaming in Cantonese words that Margaret's limited understanding told her were curses, condemnations, accusations. Her daughter tried to calm her, but Mrs. Wong broke free and rushed at Morrison, her hands raised to strike him. Sullivan intercepted her gently but firmly, holding her back. Ma'am, I understand. But you can't. He killed my baby. Mrs. Wong switched to English, her accent thick but her words clear. My Alice, my good girl. She worked so hard, study so hard, want to serve America so much. And he... She spat at Morrison's feet. He let her die. Morrison didn't move, didn't try to defend himself. He just stood there and took it, tears streaming down his face. Alice's sister spoke, her voice cold with controlled fury. Alice failed her vision test. She was nearsighted, needed glasses to see properly. She told us she didn't pass, that she couldn't join the Navy. But then she got a call saying she'd been accepted after all, that there had been a mistake in the testing. She was so happy. She thought it was a miracle. It wasn't a miracle, Morrison said quietly. It was a bribe. Your parents paid... My parents paid nothing. The sister's voice rose. We don't have that kind of money. We're immigrants. We run a restaurant in Oakland. We barely make rent most months. So how did Alice suddenly pass a test? She failed. How did that happen? Lieutenant Morrison. Morrison looked at Margaret confused. She pulled up Alice Wong's file on her tablet and felt her stomach drop. Her training slot wasn't purchased by her family. It was purchased by Congressman Robert Morrison. He used campaign funds to pay for slots that he then gave to families in his district families who would vote for him, who would support his campaigns. Alice Wong was a political favor. The sister staggered like she'd been hit. You're telling me my sister died so a congressman could buy votes, that her life was worth whatever it cost him to look generous to the Chinese community in our district? I'm telling you that the corruption went deeper than we initially understood. That it wasn't just about money, it was about power, about influence, about people using military service as a political tool. Margaret's anger was cold and steady. Your sister deserved better. She deserved a system that was honest about her qualifications, that gave her the choice to pursue other paths to serve. Instead, she was put in a position she wasn't qualified for, and she died because of it. Mrs. Wong had stopped screaming. She was crying now, soft, hopeless sounds that broke Margaret's heart. Alice called me 2 days before she died, the sister said. She was scared. She said the training was too hard, that she couldn't keep up, that she couldn't see properly, even with her glasses. She said she was going to quit going to tell someone she needed help. I told her to push through, told her it would get easier. I told her, her voice broke. I told her not to give up, not to shame our family by failing. And 2 days later, she drove off a road during a night navigation exercise because she couldn't see well enough to make the turns. Morrison was sobbing openly now. I'm sorry. I didn't know about the political angle, but I knew she wasn't qualified. I knew, and I certified her anyway. Your sister's death is on me. The sister walked up to Morrison slowly, deliberately. For a moment, Margaret thought she might strike him. Instead, she looked him directly in the eye and said in a voice as cold as winter, You're going to prison. You're going to spend decades locked in a cage. And every single day, I hope you remember my sister's face. I hope you remember that she was a person, not a political tool, not a statistic. I hope her ghost haunts you until the day you die. She turned to her mother, spoke in Cantonese, and they walked out together. Morrison collapsed into his chair. How many more? He asked. How many more families do I have to face? One more today. Michael Stevens' parents. They're flying in from Iowa right now. Margaret leaned against the table. Morrison, you're discovering something important. What you did wasn't abstract. It wasn't just paperwork, just numbers on a spreadsheet. Every falsified certification was a real person. Every bribe was someone's child. And now you get to see the human cost of what you did. I can't do this. I can't face another family. I can't. You don't get to quit. You offered to do this, and you're going to see it through. Because these families deserve to look you in the eye. They deserve to see that you're not some distant figure they can never reach. You're just a man who made evil choices and now has to live with the consequences. The Stevens arrived at 1300. They were in their early 50s, Midwest farmers with work-roughened hands and faces lined by sun and grief. Mr. Stevens wore his son's dog tags on a chain around his neck. Mrs. Stevens carried a photo album. Lieutenant Morrison, Mr. Stevens said, his voice surprisingly gentle. I'm going to show you something. I'm going to show you who my son was before you killed him. He opened the photo album. Baby pictures, birthday parties, high school graduation, Michael in his football uniform, Michael at prom, Michael receiving an academic award, page after page of a life lived fully, joyfully, with promise. Michael wanted to serve since he was 8 years old, Mrs. Stevens said. He had a poster of a Navy SEAL on his bedroom wall. He ran every morning, did push-ups before breakfast, studied military history. Everything he did was aimed at qualifying for service. And then he failed the vision test. Morrison's expression showed he knew what was coming. Michael was colorblind, Mr. Stevens continued. Not completely, but enough that he couldn't distinguish red from green. That's a disqualifying condition for the kind of service he wanted. The recruiter told him he could serve in other capacities but not in combat roles. Michael was devastated. He called us crying, said his dream was over. And then Congressman Morrison's office called. Mrs. Stevens's voice hardened. They said there was a special program for exemplary candidates. They said Michael's other qualifications were so strong that an exception could be made. They just needed us to make a donation to a military support charity, Patriot Defense Solutions. We didn't have much money, but we took out a loan, $90,000. Nearly bankrupted us. But we thought we were helping our son achieve his dream. Morrison's face had gone gray. 90,000. That was the highest amount, the premium tier, for candidates with the most serious disqualifications. Michael died in a live fire exercise, Mr. Stevens said quietly. He was supposed to identify targets based on colored markers. Red meant friendly, green meant hostile. He couldn't tell them apart. He fired on the wrong target. The blank rounds didn't kill anyone, but the shame killed Michael. He took his own life that night in the barracks, left us a note saying he was sorry, that he wasn't good enough, that he'd failed. Mrs. Stevens was crying silently. My boy didn't fail. The system failed him. You failed him. You took a good kid who wanted to serve and you put him in a position where his disability became a death sentence. And you did it for money. Morrison stood on shaking legs. Mr. and Mrs. Stevens, I have no defense. I have no justification. I took your money, I falsified your son's records, and I put him in a situation that killed him. I was evil, and your son paid the price for my evil. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make this right, and I know that will never be enough. Mr. Stevens closed the photo album carefully. You want to make it right, Lieutenant, tell us everyone who was involved. Every officer who knew, every contractor who profited, every politician who enabled this. We're going to attend every trial, testify at every hearing, make sure everyone who touched this corruption faces consequences. Can you give us that? Yes, sir. I can give you that. I will give you that. Then do it. And pray that God is more merciful to you than I feel like being right now. The Stevens walked out with dignity intact, leaving Morrison shattered. Margaret gave him a moment, then spoke. Those are the 3 confirmed deaths we knew about when we started this investigation. Now we're up to 17. Over the next week, you're going to meet every family who lost someone because of your operation. You're going to apologize to each one. You're going to give them the respect of acknowledging what you took from them. Do you understand? Morrison nodded, unable to speak. Good. Guards will take you back to your cell. We'll resume tomorrow at 0900. After Morrison was escorted out, Sullivan approached with her phone in hand. Admiral Murphy found something in the evidence Morrison provided, something that changes everything. What is it? Morrison's father didn't just run the San Diego operation. He was franchising it. 6 other bases, 6 other networks, all reporting to Admiral Morrison, and all using the same model. Training slot sales, falsified records, contractor kickbacks. We're looking at potentially hundreds of victims, not 17. Margaret felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. How many bases? Norfolk, Pensacola, Great Lakes, Pearl Harbor, Jacksonville, and Corpus Christi. Each one with a commander who reported to Admiral Morrison, each one running the same scam. We've started pulling training fatality records from all 6 locations. The preliminary count is 43 suspicious deaths. 43. Margaret's voice was hollow. 43 families destroyed. 43 lives stolen, all for profit. Park appeared in the doorway. Admiral, there's something else. I've been going through Morrison's financial records, and I found payments to someone we haven't identified yet. Large payments, regular intervals. Whoever this person is, they were a major part of the operation. Show me. Park pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. The payments go to an account registered to J. Sullivan, $20,000 a month for 3 years, over $700,000 total. Margaret's blood went cold. Sullivan. That was Master Chief Sullivan's last name. But it couldn't be. Pat Sullivan had served with Margaret's father, had been investigating the Morrisons alongside her. There had to be another explanation. Pull up Master Chief Patricia Sullivan's financial records. Now. Murphy worked his laptop, his face troubled. Admiral, there's no financial connection between Master Chief Sullivan and the Morrison network. Her accounts show normal military salary deposits, normal spending patterns. Nothing unusual. Then who is Jay Sullivan? The answer came from the last person Margaret expected, Commander Vickers, escorted into the room by Washington. I know who Jay Sullivan is, Vickers said quietly. I'll tell you everything, but first I need to ask, is the deal still on the table? Full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. Washington nodded. The deal stands, but the cooperation has to be complete. No holding back, no protecting anyone. Vickers took a deep breath. Jay Sullivan isn't Patricia Sullivan. Jay Sullivan is James Sullivan, Admiral Morrison's executive officer at Atlantic Fleet Command. He was the one who actually ran the day-to-day operations. Morrison provided the protection and the connections, but Sullivan handled the money, the recruitment, the cover-ups. He's the one who made sure investigations went nowhere, who transferred anyone who asked too many questions, who killed witnesses. Margaret finished the pieces falling into place. The 3 officers who disappeared yesterday when we arrested Morrison. Where are they now? Dead, Vickers whispered. Sullivan killed them. I know because he called me yesterday, told me I had a choice: disappear like them or cooperate with him to destroy the investigation. I chose to cooperate with you instead. Margaret was already on the phone. Secretary Barrett, we have a critical situation. Admiral Morrison's executive officer, James Sullivan, is the operational head of the corruption network. He's killed 3 officers to prevent them from testifying. I need him arrested immediately before he destroys more evidence or kills more witnesses. Barrett's response was immediate. On it. Where is he now? I don't know, but Admiral Morrison might. Is he conscious? Barely. The doctors say he's got significant brain damage. He can't speak, can barely communicate. But Admiral, there's something else. Morrison's wife came forward an hour ago. She's been documenting her husband's activities for years. She has evidence, financial records, recorded conversations, everything. She wants immunity in exchange for her cooperation. Margaret's mind was racing. Granted. Get her evidence and coordinate with Murphy's team. We need to find Sullivan before he runs or before he decides to take more people down with him. She ended the call and turned to find Sullivan Master Chief Patricia Sullivan standing in the doorway with her sidearm drawn. Admiral, we've got movement at the detention facility. Someone's trying to break Morrison out. They ran. The detention facility was only 200 yards away, but by the time they arrived, smoke was pouring from the building and guards were evacuating prisoners. Murphy met them at the entrance, his face grim. Lieutenant Morrison's dead. Someone got into his cell, made it look like suicide, hung him with a bedsheet, but the medical examiner says the marks on his neck are wrong. He was strangled first, then staged to look like hanging. Sullivan, Margaret said. James Sullivan killed him to keep him from testifying. Where is he now? Unknown. But Admiral, he left something. A message written on the cell wall. Margaret entered the cell, forcing herself to look at Morrison's body, hanging from the ceiling fixture. On the wall behind him, written in blood, were 4 words. You can't stop everyone. Margaret felt cold certainty settle in her bones. Sullivan wasn't running. He was escalating. He was eliminating anyone who could testify against the network, and he was sending a message that the investigation was a threat he intended to neutralize permanently. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Vice Admiral Chen, you've made a grave mistake. The Morrison network wasn't just about training slots. It was about identifying and recruiting the next generation of military leadership people who understand that rules are flexible, that loyalty matters more than law, that America needs officers willing to do whatever it takes to maintain our power. You've exposed one branch, but the tree has many branches, and some of us have been growing in darkness for decades. Your father learned that lesson in 1986. I wonder if you're smarter than he was. Margaret's hands shook as she read the message again. Your father learned that lesson. The man who'd killed her father, the infiltrator that Bobby Sullivan had tried to warn command about, he hadn't been a Soviet agent. He'd been part of this. He'd been eliminating someone who'd discovered the network. Admiral, Sullivan's voice was concerned. What's wrong? Margaret looked at her oldest ally, at the woman who'd served with her father, who'd been investigating the Morrisons. And for the first time since this started, she wondered if she could trust anyone. Master Chief, I need you to tell me something honestly. How long have you known about the Morrison network? Sullivan's expression didn't change. Since 3 months ago, when Naval Intelligence briefed me on the investigation. Why? Because someone just sent me a message suggesting my father's death in 1986 was connected to this network. And you were there. You served with my father. You tried to warn command about an infiltrator. Were you part of it, or were you trying to stop it? Sullivan's face went pale. Admiral, you can't possibly think... I don't know what to think anymore. Margaret's voice rose. My father died because someone didn't want him exposing corruption. Now we're investigating corruption that goes back decades and witnesses keep dying. So I need you to tell me right now, Master Chief, whose side are you on? Sullivan unbuckled her sidearm and held it out to Margaret Grip first. I'm on your side. I've always been on your side. Your father was my commanding officer and my friend. When he died, I spent years trying to figure out why. I knew the official story was wrong, but I couldn't prove it. When you came to me 3 months ago with this investigation, I finally had a chance to get answers. To get justice for Thomas Harper. I would never betray that. I would never betray him or you. Margaret took the weapon, studied Sullivan's face. After 38 years, she still saw the young Marine who'd knelt at her father's funeral and promised to find the killer. She saw loyalty, grief, and unfinished business. I believe you. But Sullivan, if I'm wrong, if you are part of this, I will destroy you. I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in prison. Do you understand? I understand. And I don't blame you for doubting. Trust is a luxury we can't afford right now. Sullivan straightened. So let's stop talking and start hunting. James Sullivan is out there somewhere and he's planning something. We need to find him before he executes whatever comes next. They found him 6 hours later, but not the way Margaret expected. Sullivan hadn't run. He'd gone to the hospital where Admiral Morrison was recovering. He'd walked past security with legitimate credentials, entered Morrison's room, and disconnected the Admiral's life support. Admiral Richard Morrison died at 1847 hours, never regaining consciousness, never facing trial for his crimes. And James Sullivan vanished into the evening before anyone realized what had happened. Margaret stood in the hospital room, staring at the empty bed where Morrison had lain. Washington stood beside her, visibly shaken. He killed his commanding officer, murdered him in a hospital room surrounded by military police. How is that possible? Because he's not just any officer, Margaret said quietly. He's someone who's been operating in shadows for decades. Someone who knows how security works because he helped design it. Someone who understands that the best place to hide is in plain sight. Murphy arrived with Park, both of them carrying files. Admiral, we've identified James Sullivan's background. It's worse than we thought. He's not just Morrison's executive officer. He's former CIA, former Special Activities Division. He was recruited out of the Navy SEALs in 1994 to run black operations. Officially, he retired in 2003. Unofficially, he never stopped operating. And he's been running the Morrison network as a recruitment pipeline, Park added, looking for officers who'd be willing to bend rules, who'd value loyalty over law, who'd be useful for covert operations that can't go through official channels. The training slot sales were never just about money. They were about identifying and compromising officers who could be controlled. Margaret felt the full weight of the conspiracy settle on her. This wasn't just military corruption. This was a shadow network inside the military operating for decades, recruiting officers who'd be willing to do whatever it took to maintain American power, regardless of law or ethics. How many officers has Sullivan recruited? We don't know. Could be dozens. Could be hundreds. Murphy's expression was grim. But Admiral, here's the thing that scares me. Sullivan sent that message about your father because he wants you to know. He wants you to understand that this network has been operating since before you were born, that your father died trying to expose it, and that you're making the same mistake he did. It's not a mistake, Margaret said firmly. It's a choice. My father chose to do what was right, even though it cost him his life. I'm making the same choice. And unlike my father, I'm not alone. We have evidence, we have witnesses, we have legal authority. Sullivan thinks he can intimidate me by invoking my father's memory. He's wrong. Her phone rang. Secretary Barrett's number, she answered. Admiral Chen, I'm ordering you to stand down. The investigation into the Morrison network is being transferred to a joint CIA-FBI task force. You're to turn over all evidence and return to Washington for debriefing. Margaret's blood went cold. Sir, with respect, why? Because James Sullivan isn't just a rogue officer. He's a protected asset. He's been running operations for people high enough in government that they can shut down this investigation with one phone call. And they just made that call. I'm sorry, Admiral. I fought this as hard as I could. But sometimes the system protects the wrong people, and there's nothing we can do about it. So that's it. We just let Sullivan walk. We let everyone he recruited continue operating. We tell the families of 43 dead service members that their children's deaths don't matter because the killers are too connected to prosecute. I didn't say their deaths don't matter. I said the investigation is being transferred. The task force will handle it. The task force will bury it. That's what task forces do when powerful people are threatened. They generate reports, make recommendations, and ensure nothing actually changes. Margaret made a decision. Sir, I respectfully decline to transfer the investigation. That's not a request, Admiral. That's an order. Then court-martial me, because I'm not stopping until James Sullivan and everyone in his network faces justice. My father died trying to expose this conspiracy. I'm not dishonoring his memory by walking away now. She ended the call. Sullivan, Master Chief Sullivan, stared at her with something like awe. Admiral, you just committed career suicide. Maybe, or maybe I just did the one thing Sullivan didn't expect, refused to back down. Margaret turned to Murphy and Park. You two are officially transferred to other duties. I'm not taking your careers down with mine. Whatever happens next, you are following my orders under duress. Murphy shook his head. Respectfully, ma'am, go to hell. I'm seeing this through. Park nodded. Same. My career's already compromised from being part of Morrison's operation. Might as well burn it completely by doing the right thing. Washington stepped forward. Admiral, as your JAG officer, I'm obligated to inform you that defying a direct order from the Secretary of the Navy is grounds for court-martial, possible imprisonment, and forfeiture of all retirement benefits. You'll lose everything you've worked 40 years to build. I know. Good, because I'm staying too. Someone needs to document this properly so when it inevitably goes to trial, we have a legal foundation. Margaret felt something break inside her chest. Not despair, but liberation. She'd spent her entire career following orders, respecting chain of command, working within the system. And the system had just told her that justice was less important than protecting powerful people. She was done with that system. Then here's what we're going to do. We're going to find James Sullivan. We're going to arrest him. We're going to document every crime, every conspiracy, every death that traces back to his network. And we're going to release all of it publicly, to the media, to Congress, to anyone who'll listen. We're going to make it impossible to bury. That's treason, Sullivan said quietly. Releasing classified information publicly. They'll arrest you for that. Let them. But they'll have to arrest me after the truth is public. After every family knows what happened to their children. After every American understands how deep the corruption goes. Margaret pulled out her father's brass chevrons, held them in her palm. My father taught me that some things are worth fighting for even when you know you'll lose. This is one of those things. Over the next 72 hours, Margaret's team worked around the clock. They compiled evidence, contacted families, built a case so comprehensive that no lawyer could defend against it, and no politician could ignore it. They found testimony from 43 families whose children had died in training accidents that weren't accidents at all. They found financial records proving the network had generated over $30 million in illegal revenue. They found communications proving that officers at 6 different bases had participated in the conspiracy. And they found something else, a list of names. Officers that James Sullivan had recruited over 30 years. Some were retired, some were active duty, some had risen to flag rank. All of them had compromised themselves by participating in corruption. All of them were vulnerable to blackmail. All of them were assets that Sullivan could activate when needed. On the 4th day, Margaret held a press conference. Every major news outlet attended. She stood at the podium in her dress uniform, 3 stars gleaming, and told the truth. My name is Vice Admiral Margaret Chen. 4 days ago, I was ordered to terminate an investigation into military corruption and transfer it to a classified task force. I refused that order because I believe the American people deserve to know what's been done in their name. Over the past 30 years, a network of officers led by former CIA operative James Sullivan has been selling military training positions to wealthy families, falsifying qualification records, and recruiting corrupt officers for covert operations. This network has resulted in at least 43 confirmed deaths of service members who weren't qualified for the positions they were placed in. The network has generated over $30 million in illegal revenue, and it has compromised hundreds of officers who are now vulnerable to blackmail and control by people operating outside legal oversight. The reporters erupted with questions. Margaret held up her hand. I'm releasing 12,000 pages of evidence to the public today. Financial records, falsified training documents, testimony from families, and a list of 217 officers who participated in this network. Some of these officers will claim they didn't know what they were part of. Some will say they were following orders. But the evidence shows they knew they participated willingly, and they profited from the deaths of young service members. I'm calling on the Department of Justice to investigate every name on this list. I'm calling on Congress to hold hearings, and I'm calling on the American people to demand accountability from the military they entrust to defend them. Admiral Chen, a reporter from the Washington Post. Aren't you concerned about being court-martialed for defying orders and releasing classified information? I expect to be arrested within the hour, but I'm not concerned. Because the truth is now public. Because 43 families finally have answers about what killed their children. Because 217 corrupt officers can no longer hide in shadows. That's worth any price I pay personally. Admiral, another reporter. Is it true that your father was killed by this network in 1986? Margaret felt the emotion rise in her throat but kept her voice steady. Yes. My father, Colonel Thomas Harper, discovered evidence of corruption in 1986. He was killed by someone inside the network to prevent him from exposing it. I've spent 38 years trying to understand why he died. Now I know, and now everyone knows. She left the podium without taking more questions. Sullivan Master Chief Sullivan was waiting with military police. Admiral Chen, I'm instructed to place you under arrest for insubordination, unauthorized release of classified information, and violation of the Espionage Act. Please surrender your sidearm and your credentials. Margaret handed over her weapon and her identification. Master Chief, thank you for your service. Tell my legal counsel that I'll cooperate fully with the investigation. Admiral, Sullivan's voice broke. Your father would be proud of what you did today. I hope you know that. I know. That's why I did it. They led her to a detention facility, not the base facility, but a federal holding center downtown. She spent 3 days in a cell meeting with lawyers preparing her defense. The media coverage was overwhelming. Some outlets praised her courage. Others condemned her for betraying classified operations. Congress announced hearings. The Department of Justice opened investigations into every officer on her list. And on the 4th day, something unexpected happened. 43 families held their own press conference. They stood together, parents who'd lost children, siblings who'd lost brothers and sisters, and they told their stories. They showed photographs of their loved ones. They read the falsified training records. They demanded justice. Public opinion shifted. Protests erupted outside military bases. Veterans organizations called for accountability. 3 senators who'd received campaign contributions from Patriot Defense Solutions resigned in disgrace. Defense contractors saw their stock prices collapse. And James Sullivan, watching from wherever he was hiding, sent one final message. Admiral Chen, you've won this battle. The network I built is exposed, the officers I recruited are facing justice, and the system I exploited is being reformed. But you didn't win the war. There are other networks, other operators, other people who understand that America's power requires a willingness to operate outside conventional morality. Your father understood that too. That's why he had to die. Not because he discovered corruption, but but because he would have opposed necessary operations that keep America safe. You're making the same mistake, and eventually, you'll pay the same price. Enjoy your victory while it lasts." Margaret read the message in her cell, then deleted it. Sullivan was wrong. Her father hadn't died because he opposed necessary operations. He died because he believed in law over power, in ethics over expedience, and serving the Constitution rather than serving those who claimed to know what was best for America. She'd made the same choice. And unlike Sullivan, she could live with the consequences. The court-martial lasted 6 weeks. Margaret was charged with 17 violations of military law. She pled guilty to all of them. She didn't apologize, didn't claim she'd been wrong. She simply acknowledged that she'd broken the rules and explained why. "I broke the law because the law was being used to protect criminals. I violated orders because those orders were given to hide crimes from public scrutiny. I released classified information because the classification was being used to prevent accountability. Every action I took was illegal. Every action I took was necessary. I don't expect leniency. I expect to be punished. But I do expect that the evidence I released will be used to reform a system that allowed this corruption to flourish for 30 years. The military judge listened to 6 weeks of testimony, heard from the 43 families, heard from officers who'd refused to participate in the network, heard from investigators who'd been blocked from pursuing leads because of political pressure, heard from Margaret's entire chain of command testifying about her exemplary career before she'd decided to defy orders. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. Margaret stood at attention as the judge read the findings. "Vice Admiral Margaret Chen, this court finds you guilty of all charges. However, the court also finds that your actions, while illegal, were motivated by a genuine commitment to justice and accountability. The court sentences you to forfeiture of rank reduction to 06 pay grade and mandatory retirement. The court does not impose prison time, but you are barred from holding any future government position. Do you have anything to say?" Margaret stood silent for a moment. Then she spoke. "Yes, Your Honor. Thank you for not imposing prison time, but I reject the reduction in rank. I earned my stars through 40 years of honorable service. I earned them in combat, in command, in every challenge the military gave me. I will surrender them because the court orders it. But I will never accept that what I did diminished my service. I exposed corruption. I protected future service members from dying because of falsified records. I gave 43 families answers they deserved. That's not grounds for punishment. That's what honor looks like when the system fails." The judge nodded slowly. "Noted for the record. Captain Chen, you're dismissed." Margaret walked out of the courtroom, no longer an admiral, no longer active duty, but still herself. Sullivan, Murphy, Park, and Washington waited outside. All of them had been disciplined, demoted, transferred, marked for slow promotion. All of them smiled when they saw her. "Captain Chen," Murphy said, "doesn't have the same ring to it as Admiral. Ranks are just labels. They don't define who we are or what we've accomplished." Margaret looked at her team. "Thank you, all of you. All of you sacrificed your careers to do what was right. I won't forget that." 6 months later, Margaret stood at Arlington National Cemetery. She wore civilian clothes, now no uniform, no insignia. Just a woman visiting her father's grave. She placed her 3 stars on the headstone, same as she'd done with every promotion. But this time felt different. This time felt final. "We got them, Dad. All of them. Sullivan's still out there somewhere, but his network is destroyed. 217 officers face charges. 43 families got answers. The system you tried to expose is being reformed. It cost me everything I built, but it was worth it." She heard footsteps behind her. Turned to find an older man approaching someone she didn't recognize. "Captain Chen, I'm Robert Rodriguez, Thomas Rodriguez's brother, James's father." Margaret's chest tightened. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm so sorry for your losses. I know that nothing we did can bring back." "Stop." Rodriguez held up his hand. "I didn't come here for apologies. I came to thank you. Because of what you did, I finally understand what killed my son. Because of what you did, I know it wasn't his fault. Wasn't my brother's fault. We were victims of a system that valued money over lives. You destroyed that system. You gave up everything to destroy it. That's more than anyone else was willing to do. He pulled out a folded flag, the American flag, from his son's funeral. I want you to have this. I want you to remember that what you did mattered. That my son's death wasn't meaningless. That because you refused to let it be covered up, maybe other families won't have to go through what we went through. Margaret took the flag, felt its weight. Mr. Rodriguez, I don't deserve this. Yes, you do. You earned it by being the one person in the military who cared more about doing what was right than about protecting your career. That's rare. That's precious. Don't ever doubt that what you did mattered. He walked away, leaving Margaret alone with the flag in her father's grave. She stood there for a long time, thinking about choices and consequences about her father's death, and her own sacrifice about whether fighting corruption was worth losing everything she'd worked for. The answer came in the faces of 43 families who finally had closure, in the testimony of officers who'd been silenced for decades, in the reform legislation moving through Congress, in the knowledge that future service members would train in a system that valued their lives over profit and power. Her father had taught her that being strong meant doing what was right, even when you're terrified, even when you know you'll lose, even when the whole world says you don't belong. She'd spent a week being treated like garbage, being dismissed as worthless, being underestimated by people who saw nothing in her worth respecting. And then she'd used that underestimation as a weapon, had turned their contempt into her advantage, had proven that strength wasn't about rank or power, it was about refusing to let injustice win. James Sullivan was still out there, still operating, still building new networks in new shadows. But he'd learned something important, that some people couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be bought, couldn't be made to look away when they saw evil. That there were still people who believed in law over power, in ethics, over expedience, in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Margaret Chen had lost her rank, lost her career, lost everything she'd spent 40 years building. But she'd kept something more important, her integrity, her honor, her commitment to the values her father had died defending. She placed her hand on her father's headstone one final time. Mission accomplished, Dad. The fight's not over, it's never over. But we won this battle. We protected the protectors. We made sure your death meant something. And we proved that some people still believe in doing what's right, regardless of the cost. Margaret walked away from the grave with her head high, carrying a dead man's flag, and her father's brass chevrons, no longer an admiral, but still a warrior. No longer in uniform, but still serving, no longer bound by orders, but still committed to the oath she'd taken 40 years ago to protect and defend not just her country, but the people who gave their lives in service to it. The system had tried to make her small, tried to silence her, tried to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. She'd refused, and in refusing, she'd changed everything. That was what real strength looked like, not the ability to dominate others, but the courage to stand alone when everyone else told you to sit down. Not the power to destroy your enemies, but the determination to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Not the ambition to climb higher, but the integrity to fall with honor rather than rise through corruption. Vice Admiral Margaret Chen was now Captain Margaret Chen in rank only. But in every way that mattered, she stood taller than she'd ever stood before, unbowed, unbroken, and absolutely certain that she'd made the right choice regardless of what it had cost her.